Hey everybody.
What? How are you? Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Sorry, I have some background noise. I'll try to mute it from time to time because
Yeah,
I
no worries.
wanted to enjoy the sunshine and then
Mm.
people started cleaning up around me. So, do you
Mm.
hear me? Or
Yeah, I can hear you good.
okay,
You can hear
okay.
me
I'll
okay?
try to speak louder then.
Mm.
Out compete them. Yeah.
Mm.
How's
Yeah,
everything? Good.
good. Yeah, everything's good. A bit of a also getting more sunshine in. I'm in Spain, so there was a bit of
Uh-huh.
a power outage the other day, which was
Yep.
pretty
Trying,
interesting, but
trying to
also
get
nicer weather here, so. Mhm.
vitamin D after the winter. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. True.
That will
hmm
be great.
hmm
So you're a graduate student, right?
Yeah, just starting my PhD.
Okay, okay.
Kind of into the transition. Over in actually, yeah, it was last week that I officially got accepted, which was nice.
Oh, really?
hmm
Ah,
hmm
so you know Clement Vidal, right? Yeah,
I do. Yeah, I do.
yeah,
Yeah, he's really into like the cosmos and like the evolution of the
yeah.
cosmos, I guess, right?
Yep.
Mm.
So we talk regularly with him. Actually, we have a meeting
Oh,
after today
really? Oh,
as well.
interesting.
Yeah.
hmm Yeah, on like a specific project or kind of just
I
regular.
mean, we're in this Evo Devo universe kind of group,
Mm,
so we're
hmm
co-directors. So there's
I see.
100 something people. So we have monthly
Mm,
meetings.
I
Everybody
see.
gives a talk. We
Mm,
discuss. We record
mm,
them like you.
hmm hmm
And yeah, so he told me last time that Francis Heiligen may be retiring next year. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because he was actually going to be my advisor, or he normally is the advisor for
Mm,
a lot of students, or for
hmm
students at Clay, PhD students. But I know he's retiring soon because he couldn't be my
Yeah.
advisor. But I
hmm
guess I think it probably will be next year. But he's definitely going to be like involved and still,
Yeah. Yeah, even
yeah,
after he retires, he'll still be active, right? Yeah,
100%. I think so. Yeah, I think
that's
so.
awesome. It's hard to stop once you're kind of
hmm
a creative person. You don't want to be like out doing
hmm
nothing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So,
And I mean, he still has a lot of
mhm,
like original good ideas. So no sense in just
mhm.
like stopping.
So who are you working with these days?
Let's see. I guess I actually just found an advisor from
Uh-huh.
Bolivia. Kind of
Oh.
yeah, she's like really in this kind of like transdisciplinary
Mhm,
kind of world, I guess. So I guess that's sort of my angle in the PhD. But I would say mostly Tomas.
mhm,
Tomas, yeah, kind of this interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary field, I guess. And then
mhm.
a little more with some like I guess NGOs that are I think have a lot of like
Mhm.
interesting ideas but aren't necessarily in the academic kind of
Uh-huh.
space. So kind of like in between that, I'm just kind of like getting into the groove of what my
Yeah.
PhD is gonna look like. So transitioning a little bit.
So she's your kind of formal advisor over the PhD? Yeah.
She pretty much. And then I have like another like formal advisor that's his name is
Mhm,
Stefan Duchesne. I'm not sure
mhm.
if you're familiar, but he's just some yeah, he's like a philosophy guy at VUB. He's kind of more so doing it just to yeah, like
Brussels.
pro forma. Right, in Brussels.
Nice.
Mm.
Okay.
And you're at Duke, is it
So
correct?
I see Fabrizio has joined.
hmm hmm
And do you know who else is coming? Or
Um, Diedrich
Hi,
said he would be
Fabrizio.
joining. Hey Fabrizio. Diedrich Ertz, do you know? Are you familiar with Diedrich?
Uh-huh.
I think Diedrich will be joining. And I think Joe and Olga will also be joining. Let me double check. I guess we'll probably wait until
Yeah, a couple more
everyone.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, that's good. Good enough.
Mhm.
How are things in Belgium these days?
Um, let's see. I'll be going there soon, so
Oh, you're not in
let's
Belgium?
not
Are
right
you
now. No, no,
are
no.
you in Bolivia?
Still in Spain.
Oh, in Spain. Okay,
Still
okay.
in Spain.
I see. I see.
So since
Oh,
I
that's
just got
all.
accepted as
Yeah.
soon, but I have to wait till my Irish
Uh-huh.
my grandma's from Ireland, so I'm trying to get like the papers together
Oh,
to get
okay.
to Brussels. Um,
Yeah. But Ireland is in the EU, so shouldn't be a trouble.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
great.
and
Yeah.
where are you from originally again?
Bulgaria. Yeah.
Ah, nice, nice.
So
Also in the EU, I guess, right?
yes, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice.
So I think it's as long as some
Hmm.
people don't come over from the east, I hope we'll stay in the EU for a while.
Mm, mm, mhm,
Right.
mhm,
But you never know.
mhm. And you're in
I'm in the US right
US,
now,
right?
so
And what part of the US again?
in Boston. Yeah.
Boston. Oh, interesting. I have a actually today there's a very or maybe tomorrow there's a very interesting conference that
Mm.
my NGO is kind of helping to put together in Boston.
Oh, okay. What is the title?
Let me see if I can find it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'll put it in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
See. Dun, 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 dun. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, it's tomorrow. It looks like. Wait, actually, today is
Mm.
like the official conference, I guess.
Wow. Okay.
Let me see.
Is there online component so you could see what's going on?
Um, I
Maybe
think it's mostly.
mostly in person. Yeah.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess it is tomorrow. I mean, if obviously,
Uh-huh.
just if it looks interesting and there's nothing else in it
Human
later.
transformation in times of meta crisis. Wow. That's a big topic, I would say.
Yeah.
Hope they can solve it quickly.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
right.
Hmm.
Okay, so I don't know. I mean, I got your question.
Mm.
So should we get started with talking about what we want to talk,
Yeah.
or
I
wait?
think that's
I mean, this will be recorded so people can hear later on,
right.
probably. Yeah.
Right. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I think everyone was here last time. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess yeah, maybe just like a very quick or
Mm-hmm.
brief summary of the what and the why of yeah, some of the research you presented just to kind of get everyone back into the context.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
yeah, let me say a couple of words and then we could get going.
Hmm.
All right, so the idea is that first of all, complexity is not well defined in terms of people thinking of different things like information content, energy flows, agency, as you mentioned in the questions, holistic perspective of like the entire system. And
Hmm.
when people talk, I go regularly to conferences on complex systems. Like some people like to use information, other people use network metrics, other people use other metrics. So it's kind of people talk across each other. So the question
Mm-hmm.
is whether there is something that could be common between all those systems, which we could kind of create a language that we could all like compare things on the same footing. And
Mm-hmm.
so Eric Chaisson tried to do that and he said he did that with the free energy rate density. I don't know if you're familiar with that,
Mm-hmm.
but recently there have been some objections, and Clement Vidal is kind of one of the people who is in the loop talking about that. And
Mm-hmm.
there were a few papers recently published by Martin van Duin, who is in Netherlands, and who is he wants to do a second PhD after
Mm-hmm.
his first one on this topic. And he's also kind of in the big history group and the Evo Devo
Mm-hmm.
universe, and he's trying to figure out how to measure things. But he kind of pushed the metric for free energy rate density, and he found out that it doesn't increase monotonically, and sometimes it's hard to define in different contexts. So
Mm-hmm.
his conclusion, and actually he presented a talk at the last week at the Evo Devo group on exactly that, which is also recorded. You could hear it if you're interested. But
Mm-hmm.
his conclusion was, and he has a couple of papers also published, so you could see those, but that there is no trend.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is there something that has trends? I don't know the answer to that yet for like the whole cosmic evolution. That's why I'm starting with kind of building up from the simplest to the more complex, because I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make sense to consider a whole system when there are millions of things going on inside and you're just getting confused. And let's say if we try to picture a system, obviously a system includes many agents, right? And they interact. And those agents uh, could most often are presented like moving on a network, performing some events. Let's say if you have a biological system, you'll have a metabolic network. So what will be the useful work or the events in that case? Well, those will be some chemical reactions, let's say, that produce ATP from sugars or produce sugars from sunlight for
Mm-hmm.
photosynthesis. What about for social systems? I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
have different systems. Let's say for computation, obviously that will be the amounts of computations per unit time versus the time and energy spent for them. And people have tried to apply to ATP synthesis like action principles um, without anything conclusive yet, but I'm gonna look into that at some point, see whether we could use some of it. But the general idea is that in physics, if we start from physics, right, then all of the things that happen in the universe, let's say all of the Newton's laws, all of the electromagnetic phenomena, all of quantum mechanics, all of general relativity, all of string theory, you name it, is derived from this one principle, right? And the question is there any use of it in complex systems, right? In more general systems outside of just simple events. So obviously for single objects, they always have maximum action efficiency, because let's say if you drop your pencil now from your desk, it will always travel on a straight line and it will not take any other path. So it's gonna always be maximum action efficient. But what happens when you put many agents together, like in a biological or a social system? Obviously, they don't do that, right? They can't obey the least action as in separate uh, like events
Mm-hmm.
unconnected in a system.
Mm-hmm.
But so the problem has been to apply that principle to complex systems is first, well, most physicists are not interested in applying it at all because they say, well, this is a conservative, which means for systems that don't dissipate energy and for like well-defined trajectories and complex systems, they dissipate energies, that they have random events, they have fluctuations from the environment, and we cannot apply them. But recently it has been extended, I would say, pretty convincingly by several people to exactly dissipative and stochastic systems with random events. And if you think about that, now let's apply this expanded principle, which could account for dissipation, account for randomness, and see whether it could still tell us something about how the agents, whatever the system is, performing, moving, right? Whether they all tend to obey that principle or they don't, right? We don't know. So the thing is, I so the problem also, so from the other perspective, people that are dealing with biological and social systems, they also are not versed too much in physics, right? So they also not interested in applying it, or it seems very hazy and foggy. What is that principle, right? And there is this gap in between physics and complex systems that I think could be bridged. So in complex systems, right? So one of the problems is that always this principle is defined very mathematically, right? So when you ask a physicist, what is the least action principle? They'll tell you, well, that's just the integral of kinetic minus potential energy over time, period, right? And that doesn't make much intuitive sense. It always happens, but why does it happen, right? I would think of it, if I try to describe it instead of in the language of mathematics, of the language of like more intuitive and conceptual understanding, for me, it is the principle of the most possible, of the most plausible. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. That is that, so mathematically in physics and in calculus of variations, it's perfectly fine. Okay, we extremize the variation of the action of that integral is zero, and we obtain all of the equations of motions, all of the Newton's laws, and we do experiments, and it always happens like that. But if you think about it's not considering resource constraints. So when you extremize the action, it's strictly called stationary action principle. It gives you the same solution for maximum action and minimum action. Now, in complex systems, you have friction, right? So you have to spend energy to move whatever objects you have uh, across that complex system network. And if you have friction, then you have to spend more energy to push those agents around on longer paths, right? So then intuitively it becomes much easier to explain the least action principle as minimizing kind of the waste. So let's say in social sciences, in economics, you have benefit cost analysis, right? So you have some benefit of whatever it is, a financial transaction, transport of some goods from the, I don't know, manufacturer to the store. And the cost is how much you will spend to transport it, let's say, in terms of energy and time and whatever salary of the driver, right? And if you think in those terms about this least action principle, right? So if you have certain event happening in complex systems, being like nuclear reaction, chemical, a social event, and you minimize the cost for that. In physics, it will be just the cost of in terms of energy and time. And you could say, okay, if you drop your pencil, you basically, the benefit will be the pencil to travel from your hand to the floor. and the cost is the action, so it's always maximum maximum action efficiency, right? So all physics, you could say, is derived from that, but it's very straightforward and simple. But in complex systems, it becomes more obvious, because when you have dissipation, then you try to minimize the unit dissipation. So if you have to spend more energy or more time or more money for the same event, well, you could do it once, but the probability becomes much less if you do that. So I think of it intuitively as the principle of the most possible or the most plausible. And in fact, Richard Feynman actually, he defined quantum mechanics in similar terms. He said, okay, for a quantum particle to go from here to there, it could take all possible paths, but the long paths just cancel out. They undergo like destructive interference in the language of physics, and you end up with the shortest path, with the most plausible, and he derives all quantum mechanics. But he did more. He extended it to statistical mechanics, where you have classical particles, and he said the same thing. The probability for the least action kind of path is highest, which means the longer paths are not forbidden, but the probability is lower, right? So that's why we say, okay, now let's not talk about individual paths, because there are always longer paths in real systems, but talk about the average path, right? The average action for many events, for all of the agents in the system. And that's why we think of it as average action efficiency to perform certain function, right? Or a certain event in the system. So that's where it comes average action efficiency. So we don't look at individual events, but the aggregate, the average of all of them. And then in this simulation, we just simplify to the bare bones, which is just 2 points in a network. Let's say, imagine you have a huge network, let's say 1 million of nodes, but you look only what happens between 2 of them, and you say, well, probably the same thing happened between all the others, right? So what happens between 2 nodes? And here the event will be to go from one node to the other. If you say our simulation is having inflow of energy through one node and not outflow of energy through the other node, right? That makes it an open thermodynamic system. In that case, you define the probabilities to get from the source to the sink of energy, right? And let's imagine for a second you shut down the inflow of energy. Well, that automatically makes it a closed system, right? Closed systems have equal probability of visiting all points, and that makes them, the language is ergodic, which means all states of the system are equally probable. So then the endpoints for these events of action are equally distributed everywhere. So if you apply this least action principle, if you say, all right, every point in the system is an endpoint, I'll minimize the action for all of them, you just end up with the second law of thermodynamics as inference from the least action principle, because you just say the most random state is the most probable, right? As soon as you open the system, as soon as you start inserting energy and you have an outflow of energy, you change those probabilities, because now the probabilities for the agents, let's say atoms or molecules, wherever they are, to visit the source and the sink become higher than to be anywhere else. And also with time, along the path between them. Like in my talk, I run the simulation. So initially they visit all points everywhere, but gradually they kind of obtain information where the food and the nest are, lay information down, and then they follow the gradient. And for us, that information becomes like the effective potential term in that in the Lagrangian, in that equation for the action. And also they have wiggle angle, which means they explore whether they are shorter trajectories And without that exploration, it's much harder for them to find a shorter path, right? But once you put a stochastic term, a random term, then it's it's impossible to do analytical solution because you have noise, right? You have randomness. So then you could say that the simulation is doing a numerical solution of that action integral. And if we just measure, like at the beginning, how much, let's say they have constant kinetic energy, velocity is constant during the whole motion, right? And then the path length will be proportional to how much energy they need to cross between the sink and the source. And you follow that through the simulation, you find out that they end up with the closest to short line to the straight line, which is in physics called a geodesic, like the shortest line between 2 points. And we say, all right, so in this simulation, we start with maximum kind of randomness, which means longest paths, maximum action to get from A to B. And at the end, they minimize that action by themselves. And you may say, well, this is just a simulation, but it's based on real world ants, right? So ants, if they have to go between the food and the nest, yeah, they will explore a big region, but eventually when they lay down a pheromone and they do find the shortest line, or if there are obstacles, rocks or trees, they'll go around them and still find the shortest line, which now it will be in curved space. These obstacles will change the kind of the geometry. What is the geodesic? What is the shortest line? And if you think about social systems, right, if you have to go between work and your house, yes, you could take a detour, you could go around, or there could be a road repair, you need to take a longer route. But if you average over the whole year, most likely your average path will be kind of the shortest possible, right? So the idea is, like, can we look at real systems and model them in a simple way, right? Obviously, the model has to be simpler than the whole system, than the real system. Otherwise, you don't need the model. And extract, like, what is essential in this case, right? So the idea is, like, if we look at different examples, we looked at stellar evolution, and we say, okay, is it true? I mean, in our model also, we vary the size of the system in that paper. So is it true that bigger systems can find shorter paths, can self-organize faster and better, right? And let's say when we put more ants in the simulation, intuitively and experimentally, more ants lay down more pheromone and they find the least action, the final path, faster in time, earlier, and they make it straighter, so they achieve better action efficiency. We looked at stars and said, well, for stars it's harder, but can we define something that we could look, how does it depend on the size of the star? And let's imagine you start with some primordial star that has hydrogen and a little bit of helium. And then you look for, if you look at stars with different masses, you can't change the mass of the star, but there are so many that you could look at all kinds. And you look at them and you say, well, what are the events there? Well, the events are nuclear reactions where they synthesize heavier elements, right? The hydrogen and helium will merge into lithium, beryllium, boron, and they'll fill out the whole periodic system. And people have looked experimentally, like they observe remnants of supernovae, which kind of expose the interior of the star, and look at the composition. What percentage is lithium from the final mass of the star when it dies, kind of explodes? What is the boron? What is the iron, right? And we said, okay, if we consider the events to be joining of these nucleons, let's say protons and neutrons, into heavier and heavier isotopes, And if we look at what fraction of the star has those atoms that merge into heavier elements, we could say, well, we call that progress of nucleosynthesis, but we could say that's measure of the complexity of the star, right? A simple star will have only hydrogen, and at the end of its life, it will have all or a lot of elements from the periodic system, and it will form even layers inside, which we didn't even consider. But we just look at the how successful it is in merging those simple elements into heavier ones. And we looked at the mass of the star on the x-axis. So basically what happened was they were producing a lot more heavy elements if they were larger, which is well known, but it's good to see whether it's a power law or not in terms of mass of the star. And also they did it much faster. So the bigger stars, it's well known also that they live much shorter lifetimes than small stars. So they synthesize the elements faster, and they synthesize more of them, which I like that because in our simulations, the ants, when we put more ants, they achieve the shortest path faster and they make it straighter, right? So they kind of achieve a high level of organization in that sense, right? We haven't yet, I mean, we have, but we haven't presented the data where we put friction. But if we put friction in the simulation, actually it becomes even more pronounced, that trend, right? If the paths are longer, they waste more energy. And the difference between the least organized, the random state, and the most organized, like the shortest path, becomes even bigger. Hopefully we'll do that. We'll present that soon. So the idea is like if we somehow could model a general complex system where we could say there are some events happening regardless of whether they are nuclear reactions, chemical reactions in organisms, social interactions, computations, can we extract some feature that is common between all of them, right? To treat them in the same way. In other words, can we apply this idea for increasing action efficiency for those systems in different domains, right? From different nature, independent of the substrate. And that actually Clement likes that because that could be extrapolated. Let's say if you look for extraterrestrial life, if this principle doesn't depend on whether you're considering atoms or molecules or social events or computations, then you could have planets where the substrate for life could be totally different than what we have now. We're very chauvinistic. We look for life only as the same like us. It has to be biological, it has to be carbon-based, it has to breathe oxygen. Even on Earth, we have examples of many organisms that don't breathe oxygen, they don't use sunlight, right? So why are we looking for the same thing? Why do we expect to find it? But that's a speculation, right? But the thing is, for those, how useful is this metric for social systems? I even put one graph from Jeffrey West for cities where he looks at efficiencies of cities in terms of their mass, right? And in his book, he has a lot more, like the Kleiber's law in biology. As you increase the mass of organisms, their efficiency of utilizing energy in terms of their biological processes increases. There are other metrics for complexity, like the different species of cells. That was one of the questions in bigger organisms. Depends as a power law of the mass of the organisms or the total number of cells. In ecology, you have the size speciation rules. So if you look at land masses of different size and the number of species in ecosystems, they follow a power law. Like if you start from some small island and bigger island and bigger island, and then a small continent and bigger and bigger and bigger, it's a power law again. So there is experimentally and observationally something about that, right? So we are trying to model it with this simple system. But I want to say here that this is a good time to say that the average action efficiency, or the principle of least action, is not sufficient by itself to explain those power laws, right? Observed power laws in nature from all different systems. And I'll say why I think so, because if we put too few ants in the simulation, it depends what conditions we have, what friction, what size, what amounts of pheromone, and so on. Even though the least action principle is still there, they never form a path, they never self-organize, right? If we put sufficient number of ants but less pheromone, they never form a path. If we put more evaporation, they never form a path. So you could say, is this enough? And we say, no, that's not enough. It has to be considered in proportion of all these other parameters, right? What is the critical number of agents in the system, being atoms, molecules, humans, whatever it is, to start forming a structure, right? What is the minimum number of energy? What's the minimum number of information, right? And the way we model that is that each of these characteristics of the systems, the growth of each of these characteristics depends on the value of the others. So if you, let's say in our simulation, we have a limited size, right? For each simulation, the number of ants is fixed. So you could say, well, that's like some society where the number of humans is fixed. Well, in that case, they undergo some exponential growth phase, but they form a typical logistic curve where they saturate, which means if you arrest one of those variables, like the size of the system, then you stop the increase of complexity, right? It plateaus. So the complexity cannot go further, even though the least action principle is still there. So in order to explain the increase of structure and self-organization and even action efficiency, you have to look at all components of the system, all characteristics, and they have to grow together. And that's why they have to be in these power law proportionalities going forward in order to keep increasing. And if you stop some of them, you stop all the others. You kind of arrest all the processes in the system. It cannot continue anymore to self-organize. It reaches some level of organization and it doesn't evolve anymore, right? So, so for us, we have to look at this. I call it like a mechanism. I mean, it's a big word, but you could call it something else. This system of equations that produce that kind of has solutions of exponential growth. But you could put in this system of equations a limiting factor, like I could put the limited number of agents in the simulation, and the solution will turn from exponential to logistic. And then I'll model what's happening for fixed size, right? So it's exponential only for open-ended growth, right? If you remove the limits, and if you think about the whole process of cosmic evolution, you could say, all right, we could reach these plateaus, right? These temporary limits. Let's say, all right, for stellar evolution, you could synthesize only so many elements, right? We have 100 or so of them. Then for chemical processes, for biological evolution, you could do only so much and you reach a plateau, you reach a saturation. Then you go to groups of organisms, ecosystems, and then you go to social systems, and you reach another plateau, and then you go now to computational or AI systems, then you'll reach another plateau, then you'll have something new. So it's kind of this staggered kind of logistic curves, like going to temporary saturation and then finding some new solution, forming a new system and exceeding it. So the idea is for cosmic evolution, is it an open-ended growth, right? Can it continue to higher and higher levels of complexity, or is there a limit somewhere in that, right?
Hmm.
So the basic idea is how can we apply this model to different systems and test it, falsify it, right? Obviously, there are tons of data. We could do tons of simulations. I already can list a number of ways. I mentioned one of
Hmm.
them. We could put in the system of differential equations limiting terms and reach those plateaus. We could add friction, change it again. We could uh, make the coefficients change during evolution
Hmm.
or for different
Hmm.
systems that will give us different solutions. So there could be many modifications. So think of this as the step one, like in physics people call it the hydrogen atom, the simplest problem that you could invent, and then test it, and if it holds, then you try to add levels of complications and test it again, and if it still holds, and then add more, like try to describe more realistic systems, and kind
Hmm.
of try to build something from that. I don't
Hmm.
know the answer to that yet, how it will hold for more complicated systems, but yeah, that's kind of the basic step now.
Hmm.
And you could say, because all those are proportional, all of those characteristics could serve as proxies for each other in self-organization, because we say, okay, action efficiency, average action efficiency, we say it's a measure of complexity in our language, but because we have the power law equation, how it's correlated to the other characteristics, right, of the system, we could say we could use any of them to obtain any other, because we know the coefficients in the equation, right? So even if we look at a system, let's say ecological system, a forest, right, it's hard to calculate what is the action efficiency. But what about if we use some of the other measures, right, and say, well, we could use those as proxies. Maybe if we have some way we could calculate the action efficiency, but we don't necessarily need it because we know that the others are growing in proportion. We think that this principle still applies, but it's very hard. We don't even know. I talked to biologists, they say we don't. I said, how can we calculate this for a cell? And they said, we cannot, because we don't even know all of the chemical reactions that are happening in the cell. So there
Hmm.
is no way to model it. So it
Hmm.
becomes exponentially hard to kind of model it in systems where we don't even know what's happening, right?
Hmm.
All right, so I'll stop here with kind of the overview. So I don't
Hmm.
take more time, but you
Hmm.
had some other questions.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I'm curious if anyone else had any quick responses that they wanted to raise or any other questions. Yeah, Fabricio.
Yeah, let me put my microphone. Yeah,
Fabrizio?
um, thank you, Dr. Georgie. Interesting conversation. I have a question. In the last years, been I have seen many aspects of various academic fields, such as physics or chemistry and economics, but these academic fields, still apply its own terms by its own means,
Mm-hmm.
such as in economics, this field still apply ratios and classical ratio that responds any necessity of in a social system, but they still use their own systems. My question is, what recent advancement in complexity theory, uh, well, my question is, do you believe has the complexity theory potential to unify all these fragmented effort across different disciplines. This is my question because I see that the complexity theory is only has been used in certain points, but that it will be great to apply in every field, in every time, in order to respond with more precision. But well, this is my question. Do you believe have the potential to unify fragmental research across disciplines?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think it's similar to one of the questions on the list, and maybe it was your question about the different language in different disciplines and how to relate. Is that how you would put it? Or are you thinking of even the next step, like providing a measure for all? So I want to say the following, that yes, I think people are using different language in different disciplines, rediscovering it, rediscovering the same principles in different words, and they usually don't talk to each other. And there could be a translation between those and unification. And I'll give you some examples. That's why I mentioned the benefit cost analysis, because that's used in economics. But if I tell a physicist, they'll tell me, oh, that has nothing to do with physics. But if I think in terms of benefit of certain motion, a translation from A to B, and the cost in action, for me, that's exactly the same benefit cost analysis, which I mentioned earlier. But I'll go further than that and say, this least action principle, it comes from mathematics, actually. First, people talked about variational calculus, right? Where you extremize an equation. And then Lagrange came and said, well, if we don't put an abstract function, but we just put kinetic minus potential energy as a function, then we obtain all physics in one shot. Even if Newton was not born, you get all the Newton's laws on one line. It's that powerful, right? And then people, if you look at economics literature, they use Lagrange multipliers all the time, which are how you solve problems in physics. When you have some constraints on the system, you represent them with Lagrange multipliers. And they have been using this for many decades. And not only that, I think economics is even more advanced than physics in using those variational principles, because they're dealing with a lot more complex systems than just motion of single objects or fields. Physicists think they're the most complex, but I think they're the most simple. And I'll give you an example. So in economics in the 60s, there is a whole field of optimal control theory, the Pontryagin maximum principle, where you basically are extending the same variational principles, the same calculus of variation and least action principle to economic systems, but because they have such a variety of different agents, different objectives, different goals, they have to minimize something for different purposes. And right, let's say a company may want to minimize or maximize profits, or maximize revenue, or maximize long-term kind of stability, right? You could have different goals, right? They just call it an objective function. What is the thing that you are optimizing for? And the optimal control theory is using the same equations. They have the same integral over that objective function over time, and with the constraints expressed as these Lagrange multipliers, and they maximize it, and that's how they do it. That's how they do their research. So pretty much, I think they have already done a lot of it. And to be honest, I'm not very deep into that. I want to be, but it takes some time to learn it, because I think it could help do exactly what you're saying, like unify, or let's say if you talk about biological or ecological system, you could say, what are the objective functions, right? Is it for biological organism, is it to, I mean, at some time, and it could vary, like if you have a predator, at that moment your objective function will be to escape the predator, right? And then if there is no predator, your objective function will be to find food. And then after you found food, your objective function will be to find water, right, for animals in the forest, right? So that could change. Obviously, that will redefine the endpoints, right? So if an animal tries to escape the predator, it has to get as far away from it as possible. It has to minimize its kind of action to get furthest away, and the predator has to minimize its action to find it. So it becomes like a competition who could minimize it. But then when you have to find food, then you have to minimize the time and energy that you spend to look for food, because if you spend double amount of time and energy, it kind of becomes pointless, right? If there are two competing species, the ones that could find the food faster will outcompete the others. They'll eat the food and win, and the others will die out. Or if they could find the water faster after that. So the endpoints of this kind of goals are changing, right? And I think if I could learn more about this optimal control theory, there could be a lot more useful things there. But it's an extension of the same least action principle that I'm talking now. And I'm starting with it because I just try to start from the most simple, and I think it works there. But if you consider a system with many different types of agents instead of just one type of ants, right? Then you consider many different goals, and those goals are changing at different times. Then it becomes exponentially more, the equation has to grow. You have to put each species, each goal, right? But I think there is a lot of it already developed there. Only the economists will not be interested in applying it for ecological systems or for biological systems. And it's up to complex systems theorists, in other words, people who are interdisciplinary and who are interested in all these different systems and trying to find what's common between all of them, to kind of bring that language in terms of like using the same terminology, and see, can you use the same model to describe those different systems, right? And my intuition is you can, but I'm not there yet. I haven't translated a lot of that and haven't learned too much about it. But I think, yeah, if people think that it's possible and if they work on that, I think it will be a very good thing. It will bring all those to a common language and common theory, right? You could have one complex system theory and you apply it to those systems and you can describe the realistic behavior of that system. I think it's doable. It's kind of like a research program for the moment. I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Which
Dr.
field are you
Georgie.
working, Fabrizio? Which kind of systems?
I work in supply chains and logistics systems, which are related with the complexity system, by the way.
Well, yeah, logistic and supply chains, we always model the systems as flow networks, and that's exactly what you have. Let's say operations research is probably similar to what you're doing, right? When you try to supply even like military operations or economic operations, you obviously will always try to supply in the shortest time and with the least expenditure of money or gas or energy, right? But yeah, that's a good. I I think that you probably always also use like benefit cost analysis maybe in operations or transport networks. Or for me, they are just flow networks. You have something flowing on the network. You have the suppliers, the consumers, the manufacturers, all of those, right? And you have flow from the supplier to the manufacturer to the consumer, right? And you have to optimize for something, right? And optimization is a big field in all of those economic and transport systems, right?
Yeah.
Have you worked with Carlos Gershenson or no? Yeah, are you familiar with him? Carlos, no?
No.
He works also on transport, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, first of all, very interesting talk. I missed a little bit the beginning because I couldn't log in very easily but okay, so my question is more for the first part of your talk. The minimal action theory. Yeah, of course.
Yes.
I'm a physicist, just to make clear to you, a quantum physicist actually. And
oh, you're a quantum physicist?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's helpful to know. Yeah, who's asking the question? Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Because it will be related to that also. My question. In quantum physics, for example, it's true that Feynman has this path integral version of quantum physics, but of course there is something essentially different there, namely that the things happen on the square root of the action, I would say. And so you have interference, and so the parts that come out in a quite different way than they classically would come out if you look to the energy and the Lagrangian itself. And in the group where I work, my collaborators and so, we also try to apply that for systems that are economic systems, cultural systems. And you gave the example, for example, if humans try to take the shortest road, yeah, they don't do that at random, like a Brownian motion would happen. Humans don't try out everything, and then finally averaging will give them, if you look to many cars trying the same two destinations, there's no Brownian motion, definitely not. Humans plan. They can look on a map, for example, so there will be much less tryouts. And the reason is actually that it's that interference comes in when humans do that also. Of course, in a very complex way. Yeah? Looking on the map is a complex thing to do, of course. But let's say you can really test this experimentally, that humans violate Bell inequalities, for example. So there is entanglement happening. So with some other groups, we really experimentally tested the presence of entanglement, the presence of quantum structures, actually, that are going on there, which explains why it's not like a Brownian motion, you see. And there is a deep influence on the interpretation also, because you said in the beginning to interpret this least action as the most plausible. That would be correct, I think, if you think of classical systems of molecules, Brownian motion, and things like that. Huh? I would agree, then it's the most plausible. Huh? But my guess is that Arndt would do different already. there would be less randomness, I think, for us. But it's a guess. It would be very interesting to test that experimentally, by the way. For us.
Yeah.
For humans, certainly, there's much less randomness. And also for quantum particles, there's much less randomness. So if you go to the micro level where quantum physics works, the path is chosen with much less randomness. And this is now appearing in the research. For example, there have been people measuring photoelectric effect or measuring also photosynthesis, for example. And they see that the paths that are chosen by the two photons that play a role there, a red and a blue photon, is really a much shorter and much less variation on it. Well, in quantum physics language, they take a superposition path.
Yeah.
And for example, also the way proteins fold, they do that in a much too short time. It's not explainable by just looking to that in a classical way, you see. Taking all the possibilities and then making this least action, the classical least action. Molecules fold in a thousands of the fraction in real life. So probably something quantum is going on there. That has not really been modeled. Well, there are some Chinese working on that. Some Chinese have taken a leap in advance of Europeans and Americans in this protein folding models theory. So that was actually my remark or question. I have the impression with what we are doing that there are really different models. Also, let's say, the Boltzmann hypothesis that the lowest entropy corresponds to everything being random is not correct if you look to quantum systems. Quantum systems are really not random in the lowest entropy. That's why you can make a Bose-Einstein condensate, for example. So in their lowest entropy, they become very coherent, actually. And I think for humans, it's also like that. The lowest entropy you find in the center of cities, you see. A very coherent structure, very well devised, very well organized. And, well, anyhow, that are the my question is actually whether you have seen into these differences. I don't claim that all this is understood very well at the moment.
Thank you. Very good questions. So all that I could think of us at the moment is that, like, if we consider, obviously, if you span all of the scales of systems, there'll be some quantum systems, and then there'll be some, obviously, if you get a lot of particles, like a lot of atoms together in molecules, you transition to classical. And in that case, what Feynman did was actually a very good thing, because he took his quantum integrals and he modified them, like removed the imaginary part in the exponent and described statistical mechanics with the same action integral, where he said the probability for finding a classical particle essentially will be exponent of the negative of action. And people have used that recently when the action is actually including dissipative and stochastic terms to derive the maximum entropy production principle. So the only thing I could say, I like your example when you said about the protein folding, right? Because if you explore, as you said, like all possible permutations, the lifetime of the universe will not be enough to fold one protein.
No.
So there is definitely something very deep in I think, quantum interactions, but that just tells you, if you were to like explore everything randomly, as you said, in Brownian motion, like all permutations, you have to, the integral of action, let's say if the initial state is just a stretch of a protein molecule and the final state is the folded protein molecule. Let's say these are the initial and the final states, and we integrate how much energy and time we'll spend to do that. If there weren't quantum effects, that integral will be huge, right? You'll need gigantic amounts of time and probably gigantic amounts of energy to try every possible configuration. So I like your way of describing it, that something happens in a fraction of a second. I don't know what are the time scales, which probably is due to some quantum effects, right? You may have entanglement, you may have other quantum effects. But when we go to social systems or large scale systems, maybe those quantum effects are not playing that much role anymore because I mean, I don't think there is quantum entanglement between, like, I don't know, large like animals or social systems. But then the same integral will be, I think, valid, because then you just have statistical mechanics where you have the probability for something to happen is exponential of the negative of the action. Now, that doesn't forbid any of the other paths, it just makes them less probable. That's why we have it.
Can I make a remark here?
Yes.
What we explore, we find quantum effects on the level of humans and even animals.
Wow.
Yes, on the level of how the mind is used. The human bodies have no quantum effects. They are huge configurations of molecules and so on and so on. But the human mind manages. We walk around, we take a decision with our car, with our minds, not with our bodies.
Right.
So the human mind manages to have that organization, very similar to what you find in quantum physics. Of course, that's not so well-known field of research where we are also working in. It's called quantum cognition. And that's a group of people who try to apply Hilbert space and so on to make models of human cognition. And it's already ongoing 15, 20 years now, with much better models than the models that come out of classical cognitive research, actually. And the reason is that as human beings, but also animals already, so I think the effect should be there with ants already, you see. We make decisions that are much more similar to what quantum particles do on a microscopic level. Then if these particles become big aggregates, they lose this capacity, they decohere, like what says in quantum physics. And our bodies, of course, are like that, like rocks and chairs and tables. There's no quantum effect there. It's too big. But our minds are very different entities. And so we seem to manage with our brains. That's still a question mark. How do we manage that? Also there we have some ideas now, because it's ongoing for 15 years, that kind of research now. And in a certain way, for example, I give you an example because you talked about astrophysics also and the possibility for life. It has been shown now by physical chemist people who study by spectroscopy. You can study, of course, what really happens in very cold dusts in between the stars, where we have like 3 or 4 degrees Kelvin. most of the chemistry that happens there is quantum, even on the level of carbohydrate the chemistry. Yeah? So they call that the tunnel effect. What in quantum physics is called superposition. In more applied quantum physics, they call it tunnel effect.
Mm-hmm.
States tunnel through another state, and they go much more quickly than you see. It's actually because they become a superposition and then collapse to the other side of the superposition, you see. But there's no classical road to go from one state to the other. It's really a quantum way. And this has been, but this is a new field of research now. That's probably the most plausible way where life could exist in the very cold dusts. And there is this theory, which I think is also plausible, that life on Earth comes from there, actually. Yeah? That it didn't appear on Earth. And we would then live in a too hot environment. You see, the surface of a planet is much too hot, really. But we manage, due to evolution and always convert in the second law of thermodynamics, we managed to have a brain that can at least cope also with this quantum structure in this very hot environment. And that's still a question mark how we do this. Huh? But there's also a fascinating possibility that is recently explored. Namely, it seems that, and that's recent what I say now, the last 2-3 years, that in the microtubules, that are little channels of proteins that we have all over our body, but mostly concentrated in our brain, we seem to use ultraviolet light as a mechanism of organization. And of course, light is quantum also in high temperatures. That's why we can make lasers, you see. Light does not suffer from temperature. There's no scattering of photons with itself, you see. Photons don't scatter with themselves. So light actually, and that would be fascinating, that we would be able to work, and also animals have these microtubules. We would be able to have quantum systems inside our bodies because there is light, which is a beautiful image also, that we would have some light inside us. And that is recent research also done by chemical physicists, that they managed to see that in these microtubules there is a quantum phenomenon called superradiation, which is a kind of entanglement actually that is taking place there. That's experimental work, what I say now. But actually very recent, like the last 3-4 years.
Okay. So I don't want to interrupt you. Do you have more to say, or should I try to reply?
I just wanted to be I'm totally willing to stay here. I just wanted to be mindful about time if others wanted to,
okay.
or if anyone needed to head out, but I'm more than willing to stay for a little bit, and if you wanted to keep the conversation going.
Unfortunately, I need to go, but I wanted to thank you for amazing conversation. It was super insightful, and I wish you a beautiful day, and I hope you see you again on our seminars.
Yeah, I hope
Bye.
exciting.
Yes, have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye. Sorry for
Thank you.
leaving early. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. So, Diederik, I wanted to, well, let me first ask you this. Do you think that minimizing action, which could be much more efficient in quantum systems, have any role to play with the structure, let's say, of the brain or with self-organization?
Yeah, I think so. And
Yeah.
Feynman would apply, yeah, but you should take the quantum Feynman on, you see, what he does in quantum physics, huh? Where you have the possibility to eliminate things. You see, you can, if you read Feynman, this beautiful book of him, QED, written for a big public even, huh? Where he says, rightly so, many experts will also understand more if they read this book. And he explains very well how, in fact, it's true that he says he has this picture that when a light ray, for example, goes from one point to the other, it can take all the roads, but it's not the same like taking all the roads in a classical way. You see, the roads can annihilate each other. So there is a definite different mathematical thing going on. And that is probably also happening if you want to study systems that behave due to a mind.
I agree with you. So what my perspective is on this is that even in technology now, let's say in computing, right, we're moving towards smaller and smaller and smaller scales until we hit the quantum limit. And then we already know that quantum computing will be
Yeah,
completely different than classical, and
for the same reason, actually. Yeah.
yeah, for the same reason. And on top of that, it will model like chemical or quantum processes immediately, much better than a classical computer, right?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I think if you try to calculate with classical computer, even the length of a hydrogen bond, you obtain it to be twice as long than it actually is. But with a quantum computer, you obtain it precisely. So for me, that's still a huge increase in this action efficiency, which means in decrease in the amount of time and energy that you need to perform this computation, let's say.
Yeah, but your general approach is correct, I think. Yeah? Only that a quantum like environment will have much incredibly more, like with quantum computing. There is this it's not completely correct, but it's the Feynman equivalent way to look at the quantum computer, that it computes parallel in all universes. But it's only a way to look at it. What really happens is in a certain way that, and I think this is what we do if we choose paths with our cars. We will look on a plan, and our mind manages to take away all the unnecessary things to try, you see. It interferes in a way.
Yeah.
We will see, oh, wait, that is more or less the road. And of course, we see in our mind all these other possibilities that would be tried out by random Brownian motion molecules. But we say, no, we don't try that. Much to the left here, I annihilated with very much to the right. You know, I will not make a complete circle to the right and a complete circle to the left. I annihilate them.
So then, do you think we still do need both? I agree with you that quantum systems could be organized at quantum level, as you mentioned, and that, but we still have both because we obviously have classical systems, right? Not all systems are quantum. I would agree that the quantum systems will be way more efficient in terms of action to perform the same computation or the same event, whatever it is. But maybe we need both descriptions at different scales, at different levels. The classical or statistical mechanical, which is, as you mentioned correctly, way less efficient because you need Brownian motion to explore first and figure out, which takes a long time, versus the quantum, which could happen, as you said, with the protein folding, orders of magnitude faster. And I agree with you also, because if you look for quantum computation, what are the best conditions? Even now we cool them down with liquid helium, right? So we try to get to the temperature of the outer space. So because you have least perturbations from thermal fluctuations. So I agree with you that probably the best place for advanced civilization will be not on a planet or near a star, but in the coldest possible place in the universe, and they may already exist and we don't see them. Now, what you mentioned with the brain is, yes, we have this huge like temperature kind of interference because the temperature is much hotter than outer space. And if we look for quantum, well, I know that, I don't know if there were people before that, but Roger Penrose proposed the microtubules, and there were a lot of people that objected that at these high temperatures you'll have decoherence really quickly.
Yeah, I know,
But if you have those photonic effects that you mentioned, you could have other quantum effects, or you could actually do quantum computation.
It is related to Penrose, of course, but the result, the experimental result of the finding of these ultraviolet light in these microtubules is not related to Penrose at all. This is a group doing completely different research.
Yeah.
Of course, the Penrose guys jumped on it quite quickly, but you can find on the web even that the one who published this article where they found this super radiant quantum effect defends and say, no, it doesn't have anything to do with consciousness. And no, we don't want to be connected with that at all. They do serious research, let's say. They really study microtubules from a chemistry point of view, physical chemistry point of view. And he's very offensive and defending. And I think that is right. That's, for me, also the first time. But let me say, Penrose, that's very speculative. I've never found that very serious. But there was, of course, one thing, namely, we can become unconscious by inhaling chemical substances. That's a weird effect, eh? So I always have thought, but that is something to take into account. So always followed this research also. I found that a very convincing thing. They made many experiments, and the way people are having an operation now, where they are made unconscious by an injection. That is weird that this can happen, no? If you think about it. And that seems to be localized, something happening in the microtubules. That was this connection that Hamarov, then, not a physicist, but an anesthesiologist was making then. And I've known Hamarov personally a little bit. I've become to know him years ago already. Yeah? And so he's motivated in that way. I think the Penrose motivation is not correct. No, that is not correct, I think. Penrose want to connect that with the collapse of the wave function, and so that is not serious quantum physics, I think. But when these guys now, well, the fact that they can make people lose consciousness by inert gases even, you see, that have no chemical reaction inside of the brain or in the body. Well, animals, they do that with animals, probably not with people, these kind of experiments. So now that they found that happened really 2 years ago, I think. Now that they find these light things inside these microtubules and this real quantum effect, you know, really studied, the guys studied it. I suddenly thought, my goodness, that's what we overlooked. Of course, I always have also thought, no, the brain is too hot, you know, to have quantum effects. It's a messy, hot environment. But if light would be inside, then suddenly it becomes possible. Just like we have lasers we have in room temperature. Because light does not scatter with light. So heat does not influence light.
Yeah. Well, I would agree with you. And then I would ask you, so I mean, obviously now we are exploring in technology even quantum entanglement, right? We could do quantum teleportation, we could do all kinds of things. So I don't see why not over billions of years, why biology couldn't have found something similar, maybe on smaller scale. But
it would be again an incredible, clever thing that that biological evolution did, Anna.
Yeah, so let's think in terms of the evolution of the brain, right? Let's say you start from a mouse, right? So obviously you have similar structures. You have the probably microtubules, you have the light, but you still don't have consciousness, right? And then you move to higher and higher animals until you get to humans. So does this have to do with something different in the neocortex, which is kind of the human? Because even if you're unconscious, those quantum effects are still there, right? The microtubules are there, the light is still there, but you're unconscious, right? Even when you sleep, you're unconscious. If people are drunk, they're unconscious, right? So there are a lot of cases where the brain is still the same, functioning the same way, but we don't have consciousness.
But I think my guess is that because it's the obvious question to ask what you say now, and I've reflected on that also. My guess is that there is already a kind of other type of consciousness on the level of the body, you see, also with the mice, also with another animal, you see, even with plants, because there are microtubules in plants also. So there is something there which is very, very alien to us, I think. We have it also inside us. I think we could call that this kind of things that we have that are more on the intuitive level, you see. And then the material brain with the neurons and so on is probably an emergent system on top of that, you see, where the more logical thought happens, the mathematical thought. We are not good mathematicians, none of us. Some are better than others, but we are not very good mathematicians, never.
Yes.
Because we have a hard time to follow a mathematical theorem. We need to make a big effort.
Even more simple, any of us is worse than a calculator, right? So
yeah. I often say that good mathematicians are actually more like good sportsmen. You know, they have an enormous concentration to not get distracted. That's the most important aspect of a mathematician, to not get distracted and look out of the window.
Yes.
And so I think that this more primitive consciousness is probably on a level that we don't control rationally, you see, but this is also intelligent. It makes that, so reading a map is perhaps not the best example in that sense, but also people will not do Brownian motion when they want to go from A to B. They will recognize some houses. They will say, "Oh, there's a big street. I will follow that big street that goes more rapidly." And they will do a lot of things that are much more intuitive also than just rationally following a map.
Well, I agree. I mean, yeah, if you go to quantum systems, you don't go through Brownian motion. That's true. But do you still think that we can somehow, let's say, if we define even for a quantum system, what we measure? Like, what is the criteria? What is the event that happens, being it computation or thought or some conscious event? I don't know what it will be, but we choose something. And then we look evolutionary how brains achieve that. Let's say, let's take the simple one, mathematics. Let's say computation, right? Because that's easier to measure. So let's say we could compute two numbers in 3 seconds, for example. But then when we go to animals, they cannot compute at all, right?
Yeah, but wait, a quantum computer is not good in computing, huh?
Right.
It goes much more fast, but it's not good in computing because it gives probabilistic outcomes.
Yeah.
So in a certain way, classical computers are much better in computing.
Yeah.
I have like a
For example, if you ask, well, we have now these large language models. Since they informed themselves on the web, so they made their reasoning patterns by imitating human reasonings. They are quantum-like. You see, because they imitated what humans usually do on the web, you see, with all kind of impulsive things and whatever you find on the web. But they also are not good in computation, just like humans. You see, a quantum computer just is much more speedy. And it's really an exponential difference. That's why a quantum computer of 50 or 60 qubits is already more speedy than the biggest supercomputer now, you see. Because it's such an incredible difference if you can make a superposition and go from one place to the other. If you can make a tunnel effect, actually, you see. The difference is enormous. So even if a quantum computer is not a good calculator, I would say, it still is much better.
So then can we think about,
just a super brief question.
Yes.
I wonder, and it could be to either of you, but I wonder if people normally describe these differences, or if it makes sense to think of these differences in terms of different kinds of self-organization, and how self-organization fits into the more quantum level and then this more like Brownian level. Because it seems like the more like Brownian, or yeah, I guess maybe classical is more like you need evidence, you need to like explore and find, but it seems like the quantum is more so like uh built on, or kind of deals with more so like imagining different possibilities. And you don't even need the evidence, you kind of just know or intuit, like the example with the car. It's like I don't need to explore the whole neighborhood to know the exact route. So I wonder if people see two kinds of self-organization, or how self-organization might fit into these two different.
I would think that in quantum systems, the wave function still explores all the possibilities, but it does it so much more efficiently, much faster than in classical systems, right? Because in classical system, if you have to do Brownian motion, it's a lot slower. You have to explore all these possibilities. A quantum system does it almost instantaneously. So even though it still explores it, I think eventually it still finds the shortest route, right? It still finds this least action state, only it does so much better than classical systems. Am I correct in like understanding how you think about it? So
But I think that's correct, indeed.
it could achieve a lot more a lot faster. So in that sense, in the language of this action efficiency, it will be way more action efficient than the classical system, which has to explore all these states. So
and it will use other techniques to do that. You see, that are really typically quantum entanglement, superposition and entanglement most of all. And
yeah, so if we look at cosmic evolution and we try to extremize it, right? Think in limits, like where is the limit? Obviously for computation, it's the Landauer's limit, right? But we are moving possibly towards quantum systems, right? So our classical world, like the way we're constructed right now, we may, like Ray Kurzweil thinks, we may actually merge with computers, right? If you upload yourself or consciousness into a quantum computer, then all this material world may actually go virtual almost, right? It may disappear in a quantum realm and in those wave functions simply because you could achieve those states. I don't know, intuition could be a mental state or consciousness way better, or maybe that's the only way to achieve consciousness and intuition is through quantum states and not through classical. So we may be headed eventually in far future towards, let's say, a quantum civilization, because that will be the only way to achieve those.
Yeah, but it's less mysterious than you imagine, I think. If you look to how quantum particles behave, that seems very mysterious because we still think of quantum particles as little balls. We cannot avoid that, you see.
Yeah.
And they are not little balls. And so we still think, wow, how can that happen, you know? But if you think of minds, it's not so mysterious. The example I gave of how people choose the shortest way between 2 points. We eliminate many of these possibilities in a fraction of a second. We eliminate them and that is what happens with the Feynman integral. Many of these roads that are there, they are immediately eliminated due to superposition and to
But I would
entanglement.
say we do that only if we have information. So imagine just for a second, you went to a city where you have never been, and nobody gives you a map or any information about the city, and they tell you to go somewhere. Probably you'll do Brownian motion. You'll get, in other words, we'll get lost, right?
Yeah, you do more similar to Brownian motion then.
Yeah.
But not completely, because cities
Yeah.
are similar to your own city, you see. You will find a big road and you will say, hey, you will talk to some people. That's a big quantum event. Yeah, if you communicate with other people, it's...
Well, if you communicate, you obtain information, but if you don't, you may go in circles, right? Many times people, when they get lost, they find themselves in the same place. So it's like a quantum particle, like Feynman described through the true slits experiment, going through both slits in a circle to interfere with itself, right?
Yeah, definitely. Suppose you have an environment where nobody is, you cannot ask anything, the city is abandoned, for example, then you will do much more Brownian motion-like things, yes.
So the key probably is information, which in quantum systems, somehow they probe all the information about all possible paths, including all the way around the universe, instantaneously.
Yeah.
So they're much more efficient in obtaining information through the wave function than classical systems, which are local. So actually, isn't the case that in quantum mechanics you have non-locality?
Yeah, of course.
And in classical systems, you have locality, which is much slower because you have to advance step by step.
Yeah. That's it. This non-locality is what is the same as superposition and entanglement. all this is a little bit the same, you know. There are different names saying the same thing. So in quantum, in a quantum situation, it's like in a mind. If you talk with somebody, there's an enormous exchange of information that is not channel-like. Yeah? It's von Neumann-like, von Neumann entropy-like, you see? And in von Neumann entropy, you again eliminate many things. Von Neumann entropy is a different thing than Shannon entropy, yeah? Than Shannon information. Von Neumann information is a completely other thing. For example, if you take the typical state, quantum state, which is where they make all these experiments, the violation of Bell inequalities, the singlet spin state, that has for Neumann entropy 0. While each spin in itself has maximum entropy. So you see, in quantum physics, the second law of thermodynamics is not true.
Yeah.
You can combine systems and lower the entropy. The von Neumann entropy, yeah? You could not do that with Shannon entropy. So information is a completely other thing in quantum physics also than what we intuitively think it is. And that is what we have been exploring even, and not we alone, in this group of people studying quantum cognition. Humans exchange von Neumann entropy way and not Shannon. The Shannon theory is actually completely wrong about human information.
What I know about those entropies is that the Shannon is syntactic information, but more important is semantic information.
Yeah.
And I call that in this paper that we were talking earlier as the pheromones that the ants leave. It's not Shannon entropy, it's semantic information. I'm not sure whether the von Neumann entropy is semantic or it's some other kind. Yeah.
Semantic.
Yeah. So the semantic information is what can give agency, what can move objects, because if you don't have, you could, I mean, and it's also relative, right? Because let's say a book in Chinese that I don't know may have a lot of semantic information, but for me, I cannot receive that semantic information, right? So it's the interaction between the receiver and the source of information. It's somehow in between, right? You have to have, it's like encryption. You have to be able to decrypt that semantic information.
Partly so, yes. All that is all these things are studied in quantum cognition, what you mentioned now. So your intuition is completely in that direction already, I see. So for Neumann information is if you apply it to human communication, you capture the semantics with it.
So from what you're saying, I could imagine that the nature, biology, has evolved and eventually found a way to explore quantum information through the brain and maybe through the whole body, because we have also the enteric nervous system which communicates with our brain, and maybe
I think through the whole body, yes, but the
Yeah,
brain
the
is then it's a cherry of the cake, let's say, the rational
I
brain.
think we are wrong to think that just the brain is what's processing information. I think it's more like embodied cognition, right? The whole body acts as a quantum system, probably altogether. Never mind that the brain receives all the information through all sensory inputs, through the skin, the temperature, touch, smell, eyes.
There's a lot
ears.
going on there.
So we can say some people try to freeze their brain and resurrect it in the future, but if you don't have the body, that brain, maybe it will not even function because you don't have connection to the rest.
Yeah, but in the future they might put another body under it.
Yeah, you could attach it to another body. Yeah. Mike Levin actually thinks about this, like, because he thinks a lot about regeneration of organs. I don't know if you know about Mike Levin, like he works here at Tufts. Actually, we work together on some things. And he thinks of this information stored somehow in the body, in the cells, and maybe it's also quantum, right? If an organ regenerates, let's say he cuts a finger or tail of salamander or some animal, and it regenerates and it reaches back to the same exact length and shape. Well, obviously, the brain of that animal doesn't tell it, the genes don't tell it. Where is the information stored? How does it know when to stop dividing the cells and what shape to form, right? It could have formed a different shape.
Yeah, and there is now research by, what is the name of this guy? We have contact with Clea, with him also.
Carl Friston?
Whom do you say?
Michael Levin.
Yeah, Michael Levin, of course. Yeah. And he seems to explore that there would be electromagnetic radiation involved there, which is quantum again, of course, if that is true. Electromagnetic, that's photons, and photons don't suffer from temperature.
I mean, also, other than the brain, even the origin of life, you could say, is quantum, because even the first, I mean, any chemical reaction in any cell is quantum event, right? It can't happen. It's not classical. All photosynthesis is a quantum event, right? You can't explain it classically. All ATP energy production is a quantum event.
Yeah.
So essentially, almost everything in biology is quantum. If you don't consider quantum effects, you can't say anything about biological events.
Proteins, most of their behavior is quantum, I think. Not only the folding, but all of what they do. Well, they are on the critical limit again. What proteins do. But you see, another aspect about what would be then the counterpart of our consciousness or intelligence, let's call it cognition, I would say, even rather. Consciousness is perhaps still something else. That is also why I don't like so much Penrose and Hameroff, because the focus is on consciousness, while it's about cognition, I think. So there are all these experiments of Libet, started with that, where decisions we take come before they see it happening in the neocortex.
Yeah, I've read about.
Yeah, and I think that's also explained in that way. There is a system in our body and in our brain, but lower than the neocortex, I would say, where actually most of the intelligence still takes place.
Well, that will be the subconscious, right? The subconscious is 90%. Yeah.
But not so much in the sense of Freud, I would say, but really in the sense of a clever system also there. Not something that we have to fight, I would say, but and the neocortex, I think, is the newest system, handling more classical systems around us. Because actually, when humans started to organize their life in caves, needing water in the river, needing to know where to pick plants, where to pick fruits, how to kill animals, etc., etc. That was probably a more classical organization level that needed to be done. Also complex, but certainly for a big part classical, because these objects are all classical. Rocks are classical. Bodies from the exterior are classical. How a body will impact another body when they bump, that is a classical phenomenon. not what happens inside of the bodies, huh? But if you want to kill an animal, you have to have a weapon that hits the body in its classical being. You see, you don't go inside of the body and try to kill it in a quantum way. Huh?
So then, do we need some complementarity between this inner quantum organization and the exterior classical organization? Somehow they interact. Let's
I
say
think so.
the mind will decide what to do. The mind will decide to kill the animal quantumly, but then it will go and do it classically.
Yeah, and it's not separated really. Yeah? Even our actions on the level of what is a little bit more classical, there are quantum aspects. For example, if you think of how the hunt started, hunt with different people, killing a bigger animal with 5, 6 people, the collaboration of how to hunt is quantum, you see.
Yeah, through the mind.
Yeah, through the mind and through the quantum mind, really, yeah, on an intuitive level, you know. And I can't even explain it. Suppose you hunt an animal with 5 people or ancestors. Then the animal can do many things. Suppose it's a bison or something like that, a big animal. It could suddenly run to one of the people, for example, and kill that person. So that person needs to start in agreement with the 5 people in a very complex way. Yeah? For example, this one person each one of the 5 persons should, for example, be able to run away if the animal comes to him, so that the others can catch it, etc. Even animals do that already. Yeah, animals that hunt in groups like lions. So you see, that is quantum, I think. The agreements that you make about a very complex behavior, where some things, you can even see it with von Neumann entropy and Shannon entropy, you see. If you think of these 5 people, each one of them must be ready to have a very, very big level of uncertainty of what he or she will do.
Yeah.
But the group itself should be quite certain of what is going to happen to be a successful hunt.
You could extend this analogy all the way to the whole society now, right? What you started doing, right? So the society organizes itself through this quantum level decisions in the brains, how to cooperate.
But each individual needs to be ready to live a lot of uncertainty. And that's the von Neumann entropy, where the group is more certain about what will happen than each individual.
So the group is more behaving classically and the individual more quantumly, like exploring more.
Yeah, well, you could say, no, one explores the quantum possibility to join elements where each element has a lot of uncertainty, but the joint has much less uncertainty. And that's von Neumann entropy.
So it's similar to the collapse of the wave function on large scale. As you put more people in the group behaves more predictably than the individual inside the group.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really quantum in the sense that so collaboration is a quantum effect. When we collaborate, we diminish the entropy, but we allow a lot of entropy for each individual that participates in the collaboration.
So then, can you think of the future in terms of, now we think, I mean, a lot of people think wrongly that AI currently could exhibit consciousness, right? But those computers that they are running, the AI is running currently are classical computers. And what about quantum computers? If we have AI on quantum computers, and our brains exhibit consciousness by quantum effects, can actually quantum computers, AIs, be consciousness by the virtue of their quantum processing?
Yeah, I think that quantum computers will be able to do the same things like we. I don't know if it is done already consciousness. I would call it human cognition. You see, human cognition with everything included. Yeah, I believe that. I believe that quantum computers will be able to do that if they're thought to be. Of course, at this moment they are not operational, really. Yeah.
They're not, yeah. But also, I would say that animals are conscious as well, not the same way like us.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
If you chase a dog or even a mouse, it will run because it recognizes itself. It could self-reflect. It could say, I don't want to be killed, for example, right? So I'm gonna preserve myself. So it separates itself from the rest of the world.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Of course, I rather use the word quantum cognition then. So also mice and animals have this quantum-like cognition, I would say. Consciousness often is also added some other things still. But I'm very fascinated also by consciousness, but that's another story still, partly at least, I think. Like people talk about consciousness, they also connect religion with it, and
I mean, more simply, isn't it like self-awareness? And then we could have different levels of self-awareness?
If you think only of self-awareness, then I would agree. Then you can talk about consciousness. And then I think also animals have that, definitely. More limited than humans.
Obviously, like you could say, well, as humans, we could be conscious of the whole universe, right? We could perceive that there are billions of galaxies, billions of planets, there could be life, there is quantum and classical rules in the universe, while an animal obviously cannot be conscious to that extent. So there is some evolution of consciousness from the primitive kind of self-awareness all the way to this perception of the universe, right? And the existence itself.
I would agree with that also. In a certain way, what we are exploring now, but that's the most speculative thing we do with my group. We are exploring now whether we could really make a similarity deeper still with what minds are and what quantum cognition is. And then we would more or less introduce the hypothesis that also on the level of baryonic matter, I would say, not bosonic matter, but baryonic matter, there is some consciousness there already, you see. It's not only animals, but even material entities have some consciousness in the sense that they can make decisions. There is a decision-making process going on. There is collaboration. So the type of interaction is not the one of ping pong balls, you see. And because we still imagine it always to be like that, we are confronted with so much mystery there. Because we still think that it are ping pong balls in some complicated way interacting with each other, you see. While I do think that it's more plausible to say that there is a type of cognition going on there. Imagine that when we talk to each other, we would have a simple model where words would be ping pong balls. That would lead to so much mystery that we never understand. And that is what are the quantum paradoxes, I think, that we still think of ping pong balls there. Even complex ping pong balls with all kind of weird properties, but it remains things that are objective in space-time. Our mind is not in space-time. See? Minds are not in space-time. Minds are not objects in space-time.
I mean, if you think about, I agree with you, like in quantum reality, you just have delocalized wave functions, but no objects, no ping pong balls. And not even that, I mean, you don't have objects anywhere, right? You just,
no objects.
in quantum field theory, all material things, all atoms and nucleons are just excitations in the field, right? They are ripples in that field.
Also, that is not a good image, I think, but it's a better already, yeah? Because you see, you still imagine that the fields in their entirety are in space-time. The real step to make, I think, is they are not in space-time. A photon is not a thing in space-time. So when a photon comes out of a lamp and then hits your eye, the way it goes to your eye is not a trajectory in space-time. Feynman integrals do it like that, but it's a mathematical trick in a certain way, you see. It's a kind of a mathematical trick that works, huh? By putting all these trajectories and then allowing interference to annihilate. Huh? But what really happens is like with the human mind, when we make a plan to go from one point in a city to another point, our mind is not in space-time when we do that. We make logical connections, we make intuitive connections, we think of what a friend told us, perhaps. We just before made a phone call with somebody who says, hey, you can go there. Huh? If you see the traffic light, go to the right. Okay, we will look to traffic lights and etc., etc. But all this happens in a conceptual world. A cultural conceptual world, you see, which is not located in space-time as objects. A concept is much more proper to think of concepts, but concepts are not objects. Huh?
No. Well, I mean, it becomes, if we want to talk about weirdness, quantum weirdness and strange things, all electromagnetic radiation, which means all photons, being it visible or non-visible, time doesn't exist for them, and space doesn't exist, right? They don't perceive time. So they are outside, as you said, right?
Yeah.
So when we say a photon reaches our eye, let's say a photon from the sun now travels for 8 minutes to reach my eye, how does it make sense when time doesn't exist for that photon in the space? Where does it go? What, like, we kind of live in different worlds with light.
You know what is the more better way to look at it? So photons have no time. You're right, huh? Time is standing still. So photons just are. They just are.
They're still, yeah.
Yeah, they are. Huh? At every moment they are. But what is time then? Well, time exists for fermionic matter. For matter, time exists. Think of relativity theory. Huh? Once there is a mass different from zero, and then there is a thing that has been overlooked all the time, although it's an easy thing, you find it in all textbooks. If you calculate the force velocity of any material entity in special relativity, so you don't have to go to general relativity even. So the simple special relativity, you will see that this force velocity is always equal to the velocity of light. You find that in every textbook, calculation. But nobody wants to interpret that. And my simple interpretation is that we move with the velocity of light. We move with the velocity of light. All matter moves with the velocity of light. And that's why we see light moving with the velocity of light. Because light does not move.
I mean, relativistically, could always consider any observer stationary and the other observer moving relative to it. So if the light we perceive it's moving at the speed of light relative to us. But if we say that the light is stationary, we are moving, as you said, with the speed
but
of
you
light.
you can even calculate that. If you
Mhm.
look up any textbook on relativity theory and see the calculation of the force velocity of a material object, any material object, it's equal to c.
Yeah, it's even more strange when you think about the Higgs field, right? Because the Higgs field is what gives mass to particles, right? And then the mass gives rise to gravity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if the Higgs field didn't exist, then you won't have any gravity whatsoever, and no particle will have mass. So everything will be massless, right?
Well, most of the mass still comes from this relativistic effect. If you think
Right.
of a nucleus, for example, it's only a little percentage of the mass that comes from the Higgs field. Most of the mass comes from the heavy movement of the quarks inside of the nucleus, and it's actually this E equals mc square.
Mhm.
So the m comes from the E of the movement of the. So we still would have mass without the Higgs field. Well, perhaps everything would be so different that also the mass would not exist. One should
Yeah, but
talk to
I mean, the electromagnetic radiation, the photons, they move at the speed of light, but since they don't have any rest mass, they never acquire additional mass by the virtue of their speed, right?
photons not, no. Photons not,
Yeah.
but gluons, yes, in the kernel of an atom, where most of the mass is, so the neutrons and the protons. So the quarks have the kernel has the mass mostly due to the heavy movement inside of the gluons. Well, the quarks actually moved by the gluons. The gluons are a little bit like elastics, huh?
Mm-hmm.
They keep everything inside there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I don't know exactly, but perhaps even 90% of the mass comes from that, I think, or perhaps even more than 90%. Now, okay, if you now change the picture and you say mass is moving with the velocity of light, then this mass or this energy, let's say, becomes a kinetic energy. So the energy of nuclear fusion or fission of a nuclear bomb even is then kinetic energy, you see. Everything moves with the velocity of light, but you can make it bump with something else so that the kinetic energy gets exploded and becomes radiation, photons.
Mm-hmm.
And photons stand still, they don't move.
Mm-hmm.
That's a better picture. Huh? Now, I don't say that this picture solves everything. You know, it's a complicated thing to understand relativity theory to its depth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we work on that also, but it's a complicated matter. I would even say,
Mm-hmm.
it's Feynman said that, and some others said the same. Nobody understands quantum physics, but I would add nobody understands relativity theory.
Mm-hmm.
But you
And maybe
see,
nobody.
there is a social phenomena that plays.
Mm-hmm.
Namely, people think that they have to understand relativity theory, so nobody dares to say it. I was lucky in a certain way when I was a PhD student. In Brussels, I never understood relativity theory as a student. I didn't dare to say it to the prof because the prof gave the lesson as if he understood everything.
Yeah.
And textbook also give this impression that they understand it and that
Yeah.
Einstein understood it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was lucky in a sense that I went to do my PhD in Geneva,
Mm-hmm.
where Stuckelberg was, which was one of the four people who actually Well, he did actually the same work as Feynman and Schwinger and Tomago, but only 3 of them got a Nobel Prize. But in Feynman's talk for his Nobel Prize, he said even Stuckelberg should have been here also. But okay, they could not give the Nobel Prize to more than 3 people, and that's one of these tricky things. So they took the 3 most important ones. But I was so lucky that I came in an environment there where immediately it was said to me, no, nobody understands relativity theory. And then you can start to think freely again.
Yeah. I mean, more to that, even there is more than that we don't know, because obviously in extreme cases, black holes and Big Bang and others, that neither theory works, or both of them don't work together. So I don't know if string theory or loop quantum gravity or any of those will help. But there is a lot more than that we don't know, which
we don't know yet how.
Once we learn, may actually change how we perceive the world, right?
And what is weird is that special relativity and quantum go well together. Because in certain way, the Bryce theory was actually founded on special relativity, even. But general relativity and quantum theory, no, nobody managed to. I have some intuition why it is the case. I think the reason is the same like what we brought up already, namely that we still have a hard time to think of a reality that is not inside space-time. You see, so the hypothesis that things are inside space-time is probably wrong. The real world is not just inside space-time.
I mean, yeah, space and time, I think Hawking worked a lot on that. They are emergent, right? They are not defined. At the Big Bang, there is no space, there is no time.
Yeah.
Right? There is this weird surface.
Minds go in that direction, but it's not something really very seriously done yet. It's very hard mathematics also.
I was thinking about this recently about space. I'd love to get your guys' opinions on it. More of like how it's thought of by Lefebvre, the sociologist. It seems like space is kind of a place of possibility or interaction, like the conditions for interaction, I think. And that's kind of how he uses it in trying to describe a city. Like there's different things you could do. There's different like possible paths you could take, I guess. But I wonder how that might sound to more of a somebody with your guys' background, seeing space is kind of like a container of possibility, I guess, or more so just focusing on possibilities or a context for things that might happen. And
but
seeing it from this like social lens.
Like it was just said by the speaker, I think space and time are both emergent. They emerge later, you see, and they probably are. I see it a little bit like that. See, fermionic matter has this special property of the Pauli exclusion principle. 2 things cannot be in the same place. So fermionic matter, not bosonic matter, bosonic bosons can be in the same place. Photons can be in the same place. Can be millions of photons in the same place. But if you go to electrons or protons or neutrons or quarks, they cannot be in the same place. So I think that is what made them organize themselves into something which has a space-like structure, you see. A little bit like we would do also as humans. If you really, our bodies are in space, but that is historically. But think of minds. Think of books. We have books in our minds. We have texts. We have conversations. Books will be already much more space-like in our minds. They will occupy the space, you know, in a library or, well, that is a physical book, yeah, but even if all physical books would disappear and there would be still only the abstract texts in a book, we would say, no, books have a kind of a space around them, you see. While a very local conversation, no, we will not put it in space. What we talk to each other now, no, that is too, it's too, too little wanting to have an identity and so on, you see. So I think that it must go in this direction, the foundations of physics. That one should then, what has to build, I think, out of quantum physics, this how space came into emergent and time then also. In time, I think, started probably together with the separation of matter and antimatter, you see. Because there is this very science fiction-like idea that antimatter flows in negative time, no? Backwards in time. But it might well be true. It might well be real, not only science fiction. And that would explain why we live in a universe of matter, you see, which is one of these unexplained features. Even the Big Bang doesn't explain that. But if you would accept that that there is a big schism, a big natural selection, you could even say, matter started to remain into existence by pushing all the antimatter in the opposite direction of time. And that would also then explain why matter has to evolve in the time direction, cannot go backwards in time, you see. Photons can go in both directions.
Yeah. So I will go to what you said earlier. You mentioned about tunneling, right? And now, classically, like if you have an energy barrier, right? And you have to go from one side to the other, you need the energy to overcome the barrier. Quantumly, you still have the barrier. You still need the energy to overcome the barrier, but you find the particle on the other side of the barrier. So we say, okay, the particle somehow tunneled, right? There was the barrier, but there is no tunnel, there is no hole, right? Now, what I do is sometimes I imagine, all right, if there was a fourth dimension on quantum scale, then that problem disappears, right? Because I could put a piece of paper and put a line there and say, okay, this is the barrier, you cannot go through here, or a pencil. But then in the third dimension, the barrier doesn't exist, or it's very small, right? I could overcome it. So it makes sense to me that there could be more time dimensions, as you said, negative time, and more space dimensions for quantum processes to behave the way they do. Because otherwise we'll violate all the conservation of energy and everything, like if we tunnel through a barrier, right? But going around makes sense to me. I don't know how you think about it.
No, but I think it's more fundamental than just another space or time dimension. You see, that is still too much.
It's still in space-time, yeah.
yeah, it's still a space-time-like thing, you see. So what it really happens, I think, is that the quantum particle can go outside of space-time and appear on the other side. It's really like a disappearance out of space-time and an appearance again in space-time. And it goes in a trajectory where it's not localized, where it's not in space-time. We can do that with our mind. Suppose, of course, but let me make the analogy with our mind. You have some of our properties Take now to be a smoker or not be a smoker.
Mm-hmm.
That's a classical property.
Yeah.
You're a smoker or you're not a smoker. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
So each time that a questionnaire is made with people, are you a smoker or not, you can make statistics and you will find classical statistics. No interference. But suppose that we ask a question like, are you in favor of nuclear energy or not?
Mm.
Most people are in a superposition. They don't have an opinion.
Yeah.
But if they are questioned, and then they say, yeah, but you should say yes or no. Huh? No, yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
Then the questioning process will force them into one of the opinions.
Mm-hmm. The
And
measurement.
and the interaction with the questioner, with the person who does the questionnaire, will be even important, to make an opinion for quite some of these people.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say, if you make the analogy with space-time now, with the two classical outcomes, smoker or not smoker, for most of the things, we are in a quantum state with our mind. We don't have an opinion. We don't make up our mind. You see, even the expression to make up your mind is actually, I could translate it and say, when somebody say, make up your mind, come on, make up your mind. This means, hey, become a little bit more classical.
Yes. So it's like the measurement problem, right? So making a decision is collapsing this superposition into a definite state, right? I'll go to the left, I'll go to the right, but before I make a decision,
I'm in a superposition.
Right, I'm in superposition. I haven't decided. So the no decision is superposition.
Is superposition. And you can still appear on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So the particle that is shot on a barrier where the energy is not enough, well, that's what I imagine, sees the barrier, because when it's shot, okay, it's in a definite state usually. It comes out of a cannon, and then it immediately puts itself in, no, I don't know where I will go in space again. I'm outside of space here. And then there is this barrier. Will I appear on this side or on the other side? Let me see what I choose.
Yeah.
And then it can still appear on the other side, even if the energy is not enough to do that classically, you see.
And the barrier itself could be in superposition, right? Because it's still a quantum barrier. It shouldn't
Also the
be...
barrier. Yeah.
Yeah,
Also the barrier.
It's not a fixed barrier, it's a quantum barrier.
Well, yeah, indeed. That is so the what happens on the micro level with the double slit experiment, it remains a very fantastic example.
Some interaction between those two quantum kind of undetermined like superpositions, and somehow something appears like tunneling out of this interaction, right?
We made an experiment with human minds that is the equivalent of the double slit experiment. And we made them choose between fruits or vegetables. And we gave several examples. So, for example, 24 examples we gave. So there was apple, there was blueberries, there was all kind of examples. There were also things like mushroom, garlic, and tomato, a good one. And then you see that people make, so the data, if you analyze the data, you get an interference pattern. And it's enough to do that with 50 students. So definite the answers are, unconscious, unconscious. So the interference is certainly not something that has been decided for, and it's repeatable, completely repeatable. It has been done now 10 times by other groups. And you can calculate the interference pattern. So you see, what happens is, to explain a little bit why this interference pattern appears. There are some, apple, for example, or definitely fruit, not vegetable. Broccoli, definitely vegetable, not fruit. So that goes through the fruit slit. Apple goes through the fruit slit. Broccoli goes to the vegetable slit. Tomato now. Yeah. What is tomato? Is that a fruit or a vegetable? Both answers appear. And why is that? Because you see, now you could say, yeah, but is that not classical statistics? Then no, it's quantum. Because if you think of tomato, or also for mushroom, garlic, you have both answers. Not easy to say whether mushroom is a vegetable or a fruit.
Yeah.
And of course, they're forced to choose one always.
Yeah.
So they cannot say, oh, but that doesn't apply. That third position is not allowed. It's like a particle. It needs to pass through one of the slits. So it cannot do a completely other thing because it's shot in that direction. So, and why is there this interference? Because once you are uncertain, amazingly enough, this I need to say, they have to do three things. That's the subtlety, of course. They have to answer three questions on a Likert scale. That's how psychologists do experiments, on a Likert scale. They have to make a choice on a Likert scale. First, how much you choose that this is fruit for all these 24 examples. Second, how much you choose that this is vegetable. Okay. And then the third question is how much you choose that this is fruits or vegetables.
But that also depends on the knowledge, right? Let's say if everybody was trained before the test and say, well, tomato is definitely botanically a fruit, right? And everybody knows that, then they'll make a definite decision. So it's kind of a measure of ignorance, right? If people...
But still some students say vegetables, even a majority, I think, don't really know that. But you see, the or question is the important one. Because once something becomes uncertain, like tomato, certainly the answer to the or will increase. Because then they say, oh yeah, tomato is a good example of fruit or vegetables, because I don't know what it is really.
I can pick that, yeah.
That's the interference.
Okay, so you get some like interference wave pattern. I see. Yeah. So I was wondering,
and you see, if you think, you should look in a book, if you look to the interference pattern in a double slit, most of the particles come on the screen between the two slits. So that are particles who gave a lot of energy to the R. I go to slit A or to slit B. And it's logic in a certain way, because the particles are uncertain to which slit they go. So most of them end behind, just symmetrically behind the two slits. There is the bump, the biggest bump of energy, you see, of frequency, of intensity. And that are the particles who finally said, yeah, okay, it's slit A or slit B. That's my answer.
I wonder if that is the shortest path, the geodesic or the least action path. Let's say if you start from the source and you go through the two slits and you measure a point right behind the barrier what's the integral of the?
Yeah, that is right. That is the shortest
That's right.
one.
Yeah.
Just in the middle of the two slits.
Yeah. So that minimizes like physical action.
But the quantum action,
The quantum physical action. Yeah.
because
So,
of the annihilation, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with water waves, you have the same. With water waves, you also see that. That has been a lot misguided in quantum physics, I think, that there is this analogy with waves, you see. Because it's, of course, very fantastic, this analogy. So you start to think then, oh, it's about waves. But the analogy is rather coincidental, I think. Waves is a simple phenomenon, too much too simple, that also has interference. And you can understand that interference. The water waves bump to each other. It's quite non-local. So the bumps go into the water. The molecules of the water bump. And you can understand how it annihilates what happens in the other slit, you see, behind the other slit. And so you find the same pattern. The waves are most intense in the middle of the two slits. That's where the waves will be more intensely moving, you see, because that's where the both slit patterns bump together.
But it's not a stationary pattern, right? Because if you follow it in time, it will oscillate, right?
It will oscillate, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like quantum, like double slit experiment, where if you shoot many particles, they form a stationary pattern.
It's not stationary with water, but that is also explained by physicists again. The waves in water are it's more stationary with sound, for example. The water waves are more complex because there is a surface effect and so on and so on. So it's a more complex pattern in water. But with sound, it's quite stationary, if you do it with sound waves. So it's quite similar to quantum then. No, most physicists still believe that you have this particle-wave duality. I don't believe that anymore now. I think it's more a coincidental effect that waves have some of the properties that human minds also has, you see. I think it's more similar to what human minds do, what quantum particles do.
All the
To what
Broyles,
languages do.
Equations, you don't think there is this wave-particle duality that Schrodinger's equation, let's say, is based. I mean, they have probability wave, not a particle wave.
The difference is also mathematically easy to say. Waves, physical waves, sound waves, or whatever, you can describe without using any complex numbers. While quantum, you cannot. That has been proven now also. So you can really prove, that is also not so long ago that this happened, but you can really mathematically prove that you cannot get the quantum probabilities in a real Hilbert space, for example. You need a complex Hilbert space. In a real Hilbert space, you cannot get even the quantum probabilities of one spin, a half, a qubit, you cannot get in a real Hilbert space. You really need and you see, the complex numbers make it so much more powerful. I can explain that simply. You see, think of the complex plane, and then think of the real line in it. In the real line, to go from positive to negative, you need to jump. You need to make you cannot, with little steps, you cannot do that. Suppose you want to transform +1 in -1. No, You need, but in a complex plane you can do that. You can just rotate the +1 through a unit circle to the -1. With little rotations, you can rotations are unitary transformations, so that you don't change anything to the structure. So a quantum atom, a molecule, you can turn into its mirror image without changing anything of the structure. You cannot do that in our real space. Suppose you look to yourself in the mirror. You cannot rotate into the mirror image.
No.
You could go behind the mirror, but then you will not be the same image, because left and right will have interchanged. Well, a quantum particle can do that.
So going back to the simulations, can we do then, instead of classical, a quantum simulation and try to achieve something similar, where out of randomness or nothing, we could see patterns emerging, which could be consciousness or information or whatever we give meaning to them. But what kind of a simple simulation we could do to experiment with ideas like that, right?
You
Where
can
we could,
you can simulate a quantum system on a classical computer. That is possible because the mathematics is there.
Yeah.
But of course, the interpretation would not be that the bits of this computer will not be qubits. So you will have simulated the qubits, and you need a lot of memory to do that already.
Yeah. Very
Because
slow.
a qubit has an infinite number of states already.
Yeah. So you need a quantum computer for those simulations.
Yeah. Well, with the classical computer, you have to make a big approximation for one qubit already. Because a qubit, I don't know if you know the block sphere. A qubit can be put in the block sphere, and that is a sphere. So you have an infinite number of states already. Every point of the sphere is a state.
And we already know we cannot simulate well quantum systems with classical computer, because we can't even predict the length of the hydrogen bond. So
even one qubit is too much for one qubit. You may have to make an approximation already where you
discretize it.
Yeah, where you discretize the surface of a sphere.
Little small number of values instead of the continuum.
Yeah. And even to have some level of precision, you have to make a lot of them already on the sphere for one qubit.
Yes.
That's an enormous difference, you feel that.
And even then it doesn't work well. Yeah. So trying to
it
simulate
it works because we have simulations on classical computers of quite some complex quantum systems, because we have enormous amount of power in computers now. So you can do that, but it's always an approximation, always.
It's always, yeah. I mean, yes, we can do it. I know that people try to do the, let's go back to the simplest, like the hydrogen bond, but even then they get double length with the classical computer. So they can do it, but how well they do it, it's another question. So
yeah, there is
and then trying to simulate a more complex, like 3-4 atoms protein molecule, it will be hopeless with classical computer.
What they do, these models for protein folding, is not on the level of physics. It's on the level of imitation of things they know already, you see.
Right. Deep learning. So we have to wait for good quantum computers then to simulate quantum systems and to understand more, to have control over what
and
we
even
want.
that I have doubts, but I'm in the little group of people who think like that, so I could be wrong. Yeah, but you see, I think that the fact that Hilbert space is linear is already an approximation. I think, like a Fourier series, where the first term is linear always. So I think, and I've good reason to think that actually the underlying real quantum physics has not been really captured by Hilbert space. It's the first order, I would say, of quantum systems. And so what will happen, I think, of course, in a quantum computer, it's the real quantum. But if people make programs now, they work out things in Hilbert space. So we don't have yet the mathematics to work with it, I think, at this moment.
Okay. So we need to program it correctly to get.
Well, people will do incredibly clever things once they have a working quantum computer. And why we think that in quantum cognition is because we see actually that if we build quantum models for human cognition, the linearity is an approximation, but it's a good approximation. So if we do experiments with human beings, like with the vegetables and the fruits, the linearity is a good model. But you can see that the real outcomes are not linear.
Yeah.
So there are little deviations of the linearity. And probably we don't measure them in physics because when they do experiments in physics, it's always with billions of entities.
Yeah.
It's never with 50.
I mean, when you have interacting systems, which by definition complex systems are, like the brain or society, it's always non-linear. Like it cannot be linear. So we need to go beyond these linear models.
Yeah, but I think that the linear model we have for quantum physics now is a first order model. And that also makes it so difficult to marry it with relativity theory, you see. Because we don't have yet the real deep quantum physics model, which would be non-linear, I think, and which would become the linear model would be a good approximation for many, many particles, and again, many quantum particles, you see.
Yeah. So I have a logistic question. I need to step out for 1 minute, but I could continue if you guys, it's not too late for you. What do you think?
Yeah, we are talking very long already, but I don't know what you want.
I'm totally fine with continuing.
Okay,
I think it's a
I'll
great
be
discussion.
right back.
Yeah, one thing that has always or one thing that kind of pops up for me in the discussion is this going back to this idea of measurement. And how
we are going in many directions, Matsu.
Yeah, right. That's true.
But okay, let's say it's interesting, because there are a lot of mutual understandings.
Right. But the thing that kind of sticks out to me is that I guess how the human mind itself is a way of measuring things, but that's not normally kind of seen as a measurement tool, I guess, for science. And that when it comes to something like a social system, maybe, or even just a community or certain things, that it's a valuable, or it could be a valuable measuring tool, which is more of like a lived measurement. And I think a lot of like scientific measurements are kind of more objective, or are more just trying to pick one particular state, but that more of like
I have a question for you. What is the discipline of the speaker?
That is a great question. It's a great.
Is he- yeah,
This
right.
the speaker. I guess physics was his background.
Is a physicist also?
I think so. Let me double check.
Yeah, it could be, yeah, because he knows quite some physics.
Right.
Or a biologist could also be.
Right. I think he is a physicist, but let me try and double check.
I will ask him when he comes back.
Yeah, right. Physics and chemistry. Yeah, I guess physics and chemistry.
Ah, okay.
Sorry, I'm back.
Mm.
So, so are we saying that we have just linear, like first order approximation of quantum mechanics, and then if we have higher order approximations with nonlinear effects, then we may be able to have quantum gravity? Because
That's my guess. That's my guess, yes. That we'll have to wait for that, I think.
so we
And
have
there's
to
nobody really working in that direction as far as I know. Even I am not working in that direction. But okay, we stumbled on that due to our work in quantum cognition, you see, where we can see the nonlinearity appearing. Although the linear model worked very well, even for a small number of, well, experimental number of 50 students, we have already good linearity, which again indicates that, well, that's why I got so excited when these physical chemist people found this light system in these microtubules, because it could be explained like that in a certain way, because when we saw that already, when the students choose between vegetables and fruits, we did many other experiments, not only fruits and vegetables, but many other choices we make them do like that. And it's very systematic, the deviation. These things have been studied in psychology also. We're not the first one. And perhaps you heard about Tversky and Kahneman, who are two famous psychologists. Kahneman is still alive, I think, even. And he got the Nobel Prize in economics. And they studied many of these, what they call fallacies. We don't think they're fallacies. We think they're quantum, you see, quantum reasonings. But they classified them as fallacies. And one of them is a very famous one. It's the Linda problem. It's called the Linda problem in psychology. And the question is the following. First, I give a description of Linda. Linda is a girl who is active in the disarmament movement, who has a lot of friends who go to protest for other things, for climate change, for example. And she works as an accountant. Okay, and now comes the question. What is most probable? That Linda is an accountant, or that Linda is an accountant who is active in the woman movement? That was the type of questions made by Kahneman and Tversky over many years. They did many questions like that. And the outcome is, if they do that with people, most people say, no, it's more probable that Linda is an accountant and active in the feminine movement, you see? Well, of course, probabilistically, it can never be more probable, because if she's an accountant and active in the feminist movement, she is an accountant also.
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, you see. And Kahneman and Tversky call that fallacies. And there are many fallacies they detected like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we analyze that now differently. We don't reason in probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
We reason in other ways. And in the models that we apply quantum mechanically for human cognition, you can see that it would be more plausible that outcomes come where they say Linda is closer, it becomes closer then to the group of people, I would say, are the properties, the set of properties where you find also feminist movement, you see. Which is also true if you would test that in reality. So this fallacy is because we don't really reason in classical probabilities. We take into account semantic issues that are broader, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And all these fallacies, meanwhile, we have made quantum models. Well, not me alone. There are quite some. It's not a big group of researchers that does quantum cognition, but yeah, there are like 150 researchers now. Also, it's still a small group, but so many of these models have been made that perform better than all the existing models by the normal cognitive scientists. You see. Now, the fruits or vegetables, there you would not call it a fallacy. That has not been studied by Tversky and Kahneman. And so there are more subtle things where you see, oh, but that's not a fallacy. It's really true that you say that tomato will be more fruits or vegetables. You see, because once the thing becomes uncertain, the semantic really changes, you see. And that is not taken into account by classical probability theory.
I'm trying to imagine the simulation that I showed you last time in the paper. Let's say, so we have these classical agents, right, our ends. So they start moving randomly and laying pheromones, but in the transition, they try out several different paths, which you could say they're in a superposition. They haven't made a decision which path to take yet. And then later on they converge on the same path. Of course, it's not a quantum system, but still they're taking kind of all possible paths, and eventually, obviously a quantum system does that simultaneously, but they do it in time, right? Which, if you say that time doesn't exist, maybe it's similar. But they explore all possible paths, even going around and around and around for a long time. And eventually they converge on the shortest path, let's say on the least action path. So I don't know if that somehow could be cast in the language of this superposition in the transition before they reach the final state.
Well,
and also,
yeah.
Okay, and then I'll continue something else. Yeah.
Well, I would say that that's the way that Feynman integrals would look at it. Huh?
Yeah.
Definitely. But in my opinion, a better way, certainly if you want to apply it to humans, decision making, is to say there are some of these paths which you already exclude cognitively, you see. You will not physically try them out. Because you say, oh, but no, that's too far. I will not try that. That is way too far. I will not try that.
Yeah, but what about if you think about it quantumly, as you said, like let's say a quantum particle doesn't explore all the possible paths, it's kind of immediately interferes them, right? So in our brain, we do explore all the other options, but we do it simultaneously, right? So we always go towards the decision that we make or the shortest path. But we actually do explore them, but we do that in parallel, like very quickly through the information.
That's another way of looking at it. You could say if in our mind we say, oh, but this we don't take, we do something with it, but it's on a very high cognitive level, and so it goes almost immediate, you see. We don't have to use our physical body to try them out. And I think the same happens with quantum particles. When they see that barrier, they don't explore all these paths that are given by the Feynman integrals. Feynman still writes them down, but then he later eliminates them, because one is negative, the other is positive, so they eliminate each other, you see. And it's even not only negative positive, it's also the complex numbers who play an important role in this elimination, much more strong than the negative positive. And so that is a mathematical way. If you would apply that to human beings, I would say, yeah, that's the moment that we eliminate them in our minds. We don't use them physically, but some of the parts we will try out physically.
But that's the same as a quantum particle. It doesn't travel all the paths physically, but somehow it gets the information, right? It explores them, cancels them, and only physically does what it decides at the end, right?
Well,
it
might, it might also, I think even the quantum particle might, there is a gradual, so some of the parts are really much more easily eliminated than others, you see. Some parts or some and try. So it's a complex phenomenon that happens still, like with human beings. Even human beings, like you said, if you don't know the city, you might try out the path, and next time from your same hotel to the conference, you might take another path, because you meanwhile talk to some people and say, hey, you can go also there, that's much better. So a complex phenomenon also happens with quantum particles, I think. But the phenomenon is, well, if you want the analogy in human beings, it's a switching between the body being really in space-time, the body-mind not being in space-time, you see, and making reasonings. It's not so mysterious. Think of what happens in the market. Suppose that a new brand of yogurt wants to be put on the market. Most of the creation of the brand will happen in the minds of engineers and marketers, of the fabric who will put the brand there. And then the prototype will be made. They will try out a little bit in real space-time, and then they put a new brand. And if it doesn't work very well, they might change it then, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's very similar what we do in society. I also think that evolution happens like that, and that is an explanation of the missing gaps, you see, the so-called famous missing gaps. Many of the things in evolution happened on the not in space-time level, I think. And Michael Levin seems to find some proofs of that, even that he can influence that electromagnetic field, so that suddenly the forms change very much, you see. So that was one of the amazing aspects of his research. So I think that also the evolution happens. Even the evolution of forms, of dinosaurs and and so on and so on, happens probably on a level which is much more inside of the body, you see.
I mean, that speaks to the classical evolutionary model of just random variation and selection is not sufficient.
It's too
just
simple.
Because the variation is not random.
It's not random, I think.
As Stuart Kaufman says, you can't you can't have a random variation way outside. You could have one gene pair mutated, but that's the adjacent possible. So you explore randomly in a very narrow space, right? A sleeve around what you have already. You can jump, right? And also in quantum sense, it may already compute many trajectories before it does some variation, right? It may be a purposeful or goal-oriented variation rather than totally random.
When the moment life started in existence, I think evolutions has happened. Perhaps now they call that epigenetics, yeah? But probably evolution has mostly happened like that. On the level of the proteins and on the level of the cells and on the level of the microscopic entities, even still more microscopic. Because there are choices that are made on with an interaction pattern that is at least semi-cognitive, I would say. It could well be that that is the most efficient way for evolution to organize itself.
Yeah.
That the random way is not very efficient, you know.
Yeah, I don't think it's random at all. I mean, there is some stochasticity, but that's just exploration, but not completely random. That will be very inefficient if it was. Evolution may not have happened at all if that was that simple.
Yeah, it would be very inefficient. How would ever a car coming to existence if people would randomly put pieces together?
Well, but yeah, humans have minds while biological evolution doesn't. So we could
I agree.
we could compute, as you said, like similar to quantum events, all other possible configurations almost simultaneously and say this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, and then we settle on something very close to what could work.
That is how I imagine now. That is the best analogy that I could find till now, you see. And that's why I don't like so much anymore the wave analogy, because waves do that a little bit, but in a very mechanical, dead way, you see.
Yeah.
In a way that is not contextual at all.
Waves are classical, right? Water waves, sound waves, they're not quantum.
They're classical things, but they do have patterns that are interference patterns also. It's true. So you could say that waves or in a certain say a little bit less classical than particles, than ping pong balls. They move all the time, and there is a frequency involved, and there is etc. So the fact that these things are found back in the micro world has more to do, I think, with the fact that there is a cognitive process going on there of a certain level. I don't say that it is at the same level as our cognition. That I don't know. Might be even of a much higher level or a much lower level. I don't know. Could be on a zombie level that there is no consciousness. But all that we cannot say. But the most plausible, I think, is that it is a certain level of cognition, not so far away from what we know, I think, or perhaps more higher is more plausible, I think. And that has organized itself very well. And that's why we see patterns that are wave-like, you see. In our society, things that are very well organized, even if they are completely quantum, the patterns become more stable also then. You always find a library in the center of a city, for example. If you look to the cars moving from people who go to work in the city in the morning, out of the city in the evening, you could see already a wave pattern there. But that is because of the very complex society organization. That people go to sleep outside of the city and go to work inside of the city.
So what do you think? I'm thinking about your choice analogy when you said fruits and vegetables. And let's say if we have one source of energy, let's say in the simulation, one nest for the ants, and then two food sources. So now they lay down pheromones, so there is a field, right? Not a definite path. So they could make a choice either to go to one or to the other. So they could make a fork, right? Branch. And some of them will form a path to one, some of them to the other. But
And some will hesitate.
they're in a superposition before they do that, right? They're
Yeah,
uncertain.
that
which
would be
one.
a great experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know people who do experiments with ants?
Oh, I know people who do experiments, but like we have a simple simulation that could do that very easily. So we could try
Well,
to.
if that would interest me to even collaborate on it. To do a simulation with arms that has a double slit, you see, that has a double
choices.
double choice. Huh? There are two places where it's very interesting to go for them.
Right. Or even they could have two different pheromones for the two sources, but they could still follow one or the other. So how will they choose which one to follow? And you could complicate it even more with your analogy with the tomato, whether it's a fruit or vegetable, right? So you could have a ambiguity in how to choose between the two. I don't know.
Of course, it should be then the following. Yeah, there should be one source, one food at the left, one at the right, but there should be some food in the middle also. But there's a barrier in front. So you see the foot in the middle, they cannot go straight. Something like that. Huh?
Yeah.
Or yeah, I will reflect about that because the similarity is.
Yeah.
The similarity.
Sorry, continue.
Well, we still think of ants going in physical space. Huh?
Yeah.
So the fruits and vegetables is really on the mind level. Huh?
On the mind, yeah.
So the similarity, once you make, even an ant is a big size body. Yeah? If you make bodies move in space, so there should be another choice they can make. Let me think of that. So one source of food, another source of food. Yeah, it's difficult to know the ants that
I
would
mean,
hesitate.
the ants, we just give them a name, ants, just to visualize them, but those could be just photons, or they could be information packages, or they could be absolutely anything, right? So you could give it any meaning that you want and make them do any choice. So it's just entities accomplishing some.
I will reflect about it. It's sometimes tricky to find something that will work out. I do believe that some of the ants will hesitate, definitely. But you see, if there's not a third option, then they will choose one of the two and you will not see it in the statistics, you see. If you only have two options, you cannot really detect the quantum effect, at least not with one experiment. Huh? Suppose you measure you make a human experiment with fruits and vegetables, but you don't measure the answer to fruits or vegetables. There you detect, of course, the ones that give a high value there. They also have chosen fruits or vegetables, but they have chosen very high the or question. You see, and then you can see in the statistic that the probability model they have internalized is not classical. Because you see, the OR probability in classical Kolmogorov probability must satisfy some rules.
Mhm.
And so we could really prove that the probability model is not classical.
Mhm.
And we could also see the interference then. If you allow this OR to play a role, that's a little bit more complex to explain, let's say, but you really can see the interference. I will send you this interference pattern of fruits and
Yeah.
vegetables.
Yeah.
But with ants, I don't see immediately. I reflected a lot about these things already. How you
Except if you make them somehow. So let's say you have one nest where they start, right? And now you have two different types of food sources, right? So they have two different pheromones to follow, but somehow they have an ambiguity whether they have equal probability to choose either, or they uncertain about the difference between the two. I don't know how to model that.
Yeah, how you could measure that? Suppose ants would then do something very weird. Then one would see it.
Yeah.
Suppose ants would then get crazy. Something if they
I
cannot
wonder
choose.
if they will split 50-50, or they'll start going with like quantum-like probabilities to the two, like not making
Yeah,
up
but
their mind, but once they go to one of the food sources, and then once they go to the fruits, and then to the vegetables, and how many times you could count how many times they go to one or the other. I wonder what
yeah,
will be
but
the
that's
outcome.
not enough. That's not enough to
Yeah,
prove that
probably.
it's quantum.
Yeah.
You need to be able to measure also
Mhm.
what they do when they hesitate.
I
Yeah.
wonder if I don't know if this would help, but maybe putting in like some, instead of just a barrier, something like that would deter an ant.
Mhm.
So it could either maybe go one way, it could go the other way, or it could just avoid the option altogether.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would provide a good third option, but
I mean, that.
Yeah, if one would know, but that's probably even not really true.
Yeah.
That ants who hesitate a long time would go in the middle.
Right.
But that will not be the case, I suppose. They will take quick decisions what to go left or right, you know. But I do think that the situation is quantum, but the way to prove it experimentally is not so easy. It's not a coincidence that it took so long in quantum physics, to find this Bell inequality stuff, to really make experiments to prove it.
Mhm.
I'm thinking. I will think about it, whether
I
something with
mean,
could be done.
you just need the statistics to be quantum, but obviously they're not behaving quantumly like photons or electrons. But as in your choices, the people that choose food, fruits and vegetables, they're not quantum particles, but the statistics is quantum, right?
Yeah, but to prove that the statistics is quantum,
Yeah.
it's not enough to measure the two outcomes, you see, because you cannot distinguish that. Suppose you make the measurement of the smoker and non-smoker, and you would find 40% smokers, 60% non-smokers, and then you make a measurement of in favor of against nuclear energy, and you find 40% and 60%. That is not enough to distinguish that one is quantum and the other is classical.
Yeah.
So you need to make a more complicated pattern of experiment. There are many possibilities. Bell inequalities is one of them. But it's complicated. You know what Bell did there? It's very genius, by the way. That because for a long time before Bell did this experimental work, about these experimental ideas, people were even thinking that you would not be able to experimentally see the difference. You see. But it is possible. And we did it with these fruits and vegetables by introducing the third question, where we asked them to estimate or fruits or vegetables. And since the fruits or vegetables is classically, probabilistically determined, once you know the fruits, once you know the vegetables, in classical probability theory, you know the fruits or vegetables. It's a formula of Neumann, of Kolmogorov, you see. So then we could show that there is this deviation of classical probability. Let me also add that this experiment was even done before we did our own experiments. This fruits vegetable experiments was done by a psychologist of London University, James Hampton, and we used his experimental results actually to prove that his outcome was not classical. He was doing that for another reason. He was doing that because they are testing models of concepts, you see. There's a group of psychologists who do experiments on testing how concepts behave, how categories behave. And we found a lot of experimental results there that we could use. Then we did our own we did it again ourselves later. But the first experiment, we took experimental results of existing in the literature. And amazingly enough, Hampton had the intuition that something weird was happening there, but he didn't have the tools to prove it, He had the intuition that something weird was happening, weirdly enough. If you read his papers, Hampton, well, he's my age, he's still alive, so I know him well now. But let's say that the way to prove that a probability model is not classical is tricky. It's tricky, but it's possible. It's actually an amazing fact that you can do that even, but you have to use some formulas of classical probability theory, and then you see that one of the formulas is violated. And that is what Bell did actually with the Bell inequalities. If the Bell inequality should never be violated if everything would happen classically, you see. And if you violate, then something is not classical.
Wasn't Einstein very much against that? I mean, he obviously was of the opinion that the quantum world doesn't behave the way it does. So I think the experiment that Bell did kind of proved to the world that that's the right way.
By some accident, I was very closely connected to all this. Alain Aspect, who got the Nobel Prize now, was a good friend of me, because in the time that Aspect was doing his experiment in 82, 81 and 82, I was making my PhD. And so we were sitting in the same group of people who were working on the foundations of quantum physics. And he was not famous at all, then. Well, because it happened in Paris, and the French, there was quite some publicity, So that was well done by the French. But the greatest experiments, and Zeilinger, who was the other guy who got the Nobel Prize 2 or 3 years ago now, I think, for entanglement, was a student of him. The greatest experiments that, for my vision, were done in Austria by the group where Zeilinger then was a student by Helmut Rauch. And that happened in Grenoble in France, close to Geneva. So we were the only group that were really close by there, So we went to Grenoble many times to look to the experiments. And so I was very lucky to go to Geneva in a certain way, because it was not famous even. And what Rauch did is actually more spectacular than what they afterwards did with Aspect and so on. And Zeilinger was already, as a student, participating in that experiment. That was in the 70s, what I tell you now. It was in the 70s. 76, I think. So I was still working on my PhD. I was starting on my PhD then. And at that time, they managed for the first time to craft crystals. Now they can do that very easily, but then this was very spectacular still. They could craft crystals that were almost pure, you know, and they behave quantum then. If a crystal is really very pure, it starts to behave quantum-like. That's another thing that macroscopically starts to behave quantum-like. And Rau's group had a crafted crystal of silicon, actually, of the size of like 10 centimeters on 5 centimeters, so that size more or less. And they shot neutrons in it. And it was also the first time that they could make so low energy beams of neutrons, specifically neutrons, so that you could say that on average there was only one neutron every 300 meters. So you could actually say there was only one neutron in the crystal each time. So he shot neutrons on the crystal with one neutron in the crystal always. Even then, he managed to have the interference pattern.
Wow.
It was only one particle.
Delocalized.
Yeah. It was completely delocalized. This never became very famous. So I was really with this privilege, you know, to know this in the beginning of my PhD already. So I was confronted with, my goodness, there's no doubt anymore, you know. There's no doubt. This is really non-locality. Much more stronger than later what expectancy did. Without any trouble, because it was only one neutron that was in this crystal. And what he then did was even more amazing. I still find it nowadays the most amazing experiment. The neutron would follow a path that was split in two. The crystal had actually three barriers of crystals still. So the neutron would go to the first crystal barrier, split in two there, then go to the second crystal barrier, split in four, but two of them would come back again in the third barrier, and there they would interfere. But what he then did was the most magical thing you can imagine. A neutron has a spin. So he managed, because the crystal was quite big, 5 centimeters in width, he managed to have a magnetic field that only would work on one of the two beams, on one of the two parts, and rotate the spin there. And then the most amazing thing happens, because if you make a quantum description of spin, perhaps you heard about that already, but to find exactly the same state, you have to rotate 2 times 360 degrees. Because if you rotate 1 time, you make the state into is negative. Because the spin rotates half of the angle of what you do in the real world, actually.
Complex,
Yeah, that is, again, quantum, you know. It's because SU2, the spin works with unitary group, complex group, and SU2, SO3 is how we rotate in our world here, our 3-dimensional world. The angle of SO3 is double the angle of what in SU2 happens. So if you rotate the spin in real world, in the labo, over a whole 360 degrees, it only has rotated 180 degrees. In the quantum.
Similar to polarization of light, like if you have a Poincare sphere, and you have to...
Wait, the magic would still come. He did that on one part, where the neutron would fly, but the neutron was split in these two parts, on non-local. If he rotated the neutron for 360 degrees on one part, the interference patterns changed completely. And that was predicted because he only rotated 180 degrees on the quantum world, you see. But now, suppose he rotated on the two beams 360 degrees. Nothing happened with the interference pattern, as if nothing changed. So he could rotate 180 degrees on one and additionally 180 degrees on the other. And the neutron said, okay, now I'm completely rotated.
Even though they're two separate.
Yeah, and all combinations, he could rotate back, for example, on one part, what he did on the other part. So it really proved that the neutron was in these two places, you see. 5 centimeters in between.
Wow, that's incredible.
Now if you think to have the scale, the neutron has a coherence length where it is localized, because the neutron is a real particle. It's very, very well localized as a particle. That if you would make this coherence length, that is the length where it is localized, I could say, as one particle. Suppose you would make that into a cube of 10 centimeters. So magnify it. Then the 5 centimeters of the crystal would become 4,000 kilometers.
Wow.
So it would be the same like shooting a neutron that is localized in a cube of 10 centimeters. For example, shooting it in Paris, it would fly, one part would fly through, I don't know, somewhere to Austria, and another part would fly to Sweden. There they would converge and go both to Russia. And you could rotate in Austria and rotate in Sweden, and as if you rotated one thing.
Unbelievable. That should be. People should talk about this a lot and use it.
Yeah, that's still the most spectacular experiment. And Zeilinger was already a student then, because he's one of the co-authors of that article. But then Zeilinger took over and he did many, many spectacular experiments of the same style. But actually, it's Rau who showed to me, no, come on, you should really accept that this is how the world is. Because you have philosophy, you have you have theory, but it's the experiments who finally have to decide.
Yeah, the experiment is everything. And in the experiments, we find such things that we can't explain them. We don't have a theory for them. So
yeah, so this idea
of
quantum particles not being in space is very old in my mind. I didn't dare to say it then, neither to write it. And slowly it started to get accepted now, because quite some physicists think now that space is an emergent entity, you see.
I mean, even just the quantum entanglement probably tells you that there is no space, because how can a particle here and an Andromeda be connected and react at the same time?
Yeah.
If there was space, they need the speed of light to traverse it.
Yeah. But you see, there it's again, so many things come in that you can say, yeah, but perhaps I've looked something. And that's also why this entanglement, there's so many loopholes that one needed to close then still, experimentally. Why this experiment of Rauch, there are no loopholes actually, you know. But it was with neutrons, it's true. But it was also because he was doing that in Austria. Austria was not famous for these things. And yeah, that also plays a certain role.
There are many overlooked theories and experiments, unfortunately, that people rediscover many years later. Should have done something with them earlier.
And then then also what people don't know usually is that Bell, although it is really fantastic to see these inequalities and so, but Bell was a very weird physicist, you know. I know him very well also because we also went to the same conferences all the time, and he was a vegetarian and me too, so we sat on the same table usually. So I started to know Bell very well, but you see, his motivation was really to prove quantum mechanics wrong.
Oh, the
Yeah.
opposite.
And no, but it's a strong motivation, and that's why he found his inequalities. He really thought that the experiments would not violate the inequalities, you see. And so he was actually disappointed when all this started to happen. And he was always on the side of the ones that still saw loopholes. Oh, but that's the reason something went wrong there.
Yeah, man, there are many examples like that. Like Michelson and Morley tried to find the speed of rotation of the Earth in ether, and they found there is no ether, so they were disappointed.
Yeah, they were also disappointed.
So that tells you if you do good, diligent experiments, no matter what you find, it's always good.
Yeah, if you don't find what you like to find, and you work like 10 years for an experiment, like it is in physics now, huh? These experiments, sometimes there is 10 years of preparation, huh? And
So
also, yeah.
let's think about some, if there is something in simulations or other ways that could be done to kind of.
What is your first? I was asking that to Matthew. Are you a physicist also, or?
Yes, I'm a physicist, but I took kind of a long and not the direction that I wanted to go. So I passed through many different areas of physics. But yeah, I teach physics currently. Yeah, so I do.
Yeah, but I thought already. Yeah, because. No, but let's think about something that could be done on the biological level. That would be interesting. We have tried something with lizards. Yeah, I will send you this article. We wrote something on a behavior of lizards, which should be quantum, but I was not really satisfied completely with that. Because again, well, I learned with it again. Again, it was not so obvious to see. You see, the lizards behave, lizards and colors. But it's a whole story. I will not start telling it now because I cannot tell it in less than half an hour. I think it's a complicated story, but we could find some violation of classical probability there with lizards. Certain behavior of lizards that was well studied, and by accident we even collaborated with one of the famous lizard researchers, let's say, an American, and it was on a conference that we met each other, and so it happened a little bit like now, where we started to talk, and then he came up and said, "Yeah, but my lizards behave like that and that and that," and so yeah, we published that even. But yeah, now already 10 years ago, perhaps I should look to the article. I was not completely satisfied because. But if I would think again about it, I didn't know so much than what I know now when we did this. So I should perhaps reflect again how this could be generalized to other animals, you see, like ants and pheromones.
I mean, if it happens in some animal, probably it's a property of all biological systems.
To shortly say that the lizards and that the lizard guys, the lizard researchers already noted that there is this game rock,
Paper,
paper, scissors, yeah? And the lizards play a game like that with each other.
Okay.
And we knew already that this game has a non-classical probability.
Okay.
People decide very quickly, yeah? So there's always a decision to be made, yeah? And so that article is on this game played by lizards.
Yeah, there is so much to discover. That's so fascinating.
And so that is actually the only thing we managed to do on animals, on behavior of animals. But it was already known that lizards play that rock, paper, scissors game. The lizard guys, the lizard researchers made even models that people had made for that rock, paper,
Scissors.
scissors game. And so we added a quantum model to it. And we also prove in that model that it's quantum. But that's where I saw, oh, but wait, it was more complicated again than if you only have the vegetables and fruits where only the mind works, you see. Because the lizards were doing also something in physical world with the colors. So the game was played with their colors, you see.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. Probably there are a lot more examples like this that we haven't studied.
But it did confirm what I tried to bring forward here. I think that there is a mixture of classical and quantum that happens in human society, and that explains why some things happen much more quickly, you see. But like with proteins, and probably like on all levels of life. But let's keep some contact. We can think of something actually, indeed.
I will be very happy to continue talking about this, and hopefully, yeah, we could arrive at something interesting and new and publish or do simulation or talk to some other people, experimenters. Yes, I will definitely like to follow. So you have my email probably in the link for the article. You could send me an email, and then we could continue.
Yeah. Let's make connection. Now it's true that we both already busy, also probably, but at least this conversation was very fruitful. I could see that also you're feeling that some semantics is going on there. That is the clue, actually. You see.
Yeah. I think Carlo Rovelli also, he works on semantic information. They have some new theory. I should look into that with some other people. But yeah, okay, that will be absolutely fantastic. I would love to do that.
It was a nice conversation. Matthew organized it.
Matthew, sorry for the long time.
No, it's fine.
I hope that you have said that you have not had too bad a time, because we talked about many things that were going from one to the other. But
yeah,
what Matthew certainly should have understood is that there's a lot of work to do still.
Yes, lots of work. 100%. That message was definitely received. Yeah.
So no problem.
I'd be happy to connect you guys over email. I mean, I guess you have your email already, but maybe I can also summarize some of the main points too.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I thank you. It was great to listen in and be a fly on the wall, because I think there was a lot of interesting points.
I hope I didn't bring more confusion or something else.
Maybe a little bit, but not entirely. A lot of clarity as well, which is good.
Confusion is just a quantum superposition of your thoughts, so that's a good thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, but Matthew, you should know that it's not meant whatever you will do for your PhD, it's not meant that you solve all these things.
Right, of course, of course.
No.
Mhm.
No, you should really take something. Certainly, if you were inspired by the work of my conversation here,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
should keep being inspired by that, I think, and not make it not make it explode into quantum.
Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
yeah,
Okay,
there
you
is so
can
much to do
add a
that.
chapter. You can add a chapter about
True.
this.
True. True.
There is always so much to do that the hard thing is to put boundaries, to limit ourselves to
Right.
something
Yeah,
manageable. Otherwise, it keeps
Mhm.
going on forever.
Mhm.
and
Right.
certainly
Actually,
for a
right.
PhD.
I will be starting soon, so and I think I'm gonna have a bit of an email chain with people like yourself to kind of stay updated, kind of like a closer group. So
Mhm.
yeah, it'd be great to keep you guys in the loop on some of the research I'm doing. So
Oh yes,
that'd be awesome.
definitely. And
Mhm.
yeah, if there are other talks, send some messages, and
Mhm.
if we
Mhm.
are interested, we'll join too.
Mhm.
All right. Thanks, Matthew.
Okay,
Mhm.
bye,
Mhm.
and see you soon again. Perhaps we will see.
Yes,
Yes.
definitely,
Mhm.
Didrik. I'll be happy
Mhm.
to,
Mhm.
and it was my pleasure.
Mhm.
An honor.
All right. See you
Thank
guys.
you. See you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye, yeah.
Mhm.